There is a single shot near the start of the new teaser, a pair of eyes lit up white in a broken sky. And for half a second, I was certain I was looking at Korra. Not a memory of her, not a painting of her standing in the wreckage of a world that has clearly ended. And then the trailer turns, and you understand that the people living in that ruined world do not speak about the Avatar the way we always have. They do not call her their protector, they call her the reason everything fell apart. That is the show we are here for tonight. It is called Avatar: Seven Havens. It does not even air until October, and almost everything about it is still sitting just out of reach. Tonight we are going through all of it, every confirmed fact, every careful maybe, and all the ground it stands on. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed to Ember yet, it genuinely does help us keep making these. Let me start with the simplest version of what this thing actually is, because even that has more shape to it than most people realize. Avatar: Seven Havens is the third animated series in the Avatar franchise. Not a spin-off, not a comic, not a film, a full series, and it arrives as a direct sequel to both of the shows that came before it. That is worth holding onto for a moment, because the two shows it follows do not usually get spoken about as one continuous thing. The first was Avatar: The Last Airbender, which aired from 2005 to 2008, the story of Aang, the boy pulled out of an iceberg who had to end a 100-year war. The second was The Legend of Korra, which aired from 2012 to 2014, set roughly 70 years later. The story of the headstrong waterbender who inherited Aang's role in a world that was already turning modern, with cars and radios and factories creeping into a place that used to run on spirits and tradition. Seven Havens picks up the thread after both of them. It is not a reboot, it is not a reimagining, it is the next chapter in the same unbroken line. And the people making it are the same two people who started that line in the first place. Those two people are Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko. And if you have ever watched the credits of either earlier show, you already know why that matters. They created Avatar together back in the early 2000s, they carried it through Korra, and then for years they stepped in and out of the world as it passed through other hands, comics, a live-action attempt, all sorts of plans that came and went. Now they are back at the center of it. They run a studio built specifically to make Avatar and only Avatar, and Seven Havens is being made under their direct watch. That is the detail I find most reassuring in the entire announcement, honestly, because the biggest fear any longtime viewer has about a continuation is that it will be handed to people who love the aesthetic but not the bones of the thing. That is not what is happening here. The bones are being handled by the people who grew them. The series is set to premiere on Friday, October 9th, 2026, and it is landing on Paramount+, which is a detail I will come back to later because it says something about where this whole franchise is being steered. It is built as 2 seasons, or 2 books, to use the franchise's own word for a season, and each book is 13 episodes, which gives you 26 episodes in total, each running around 22 minutes. That is a compact, deliberate shape. It is not an open-ended series that will run as long as the numbers hold up. 26 episodes, 2 books, a beginning, and presumably an end already sketched. When the creators talk about it, they talk about it as a story with a plan, and the structure backs that up. And here's the first thing that genuinely surprised me when I read into how it is being made. This is a 2-dimensional animated series, hand-drawn in the old sense, but it is not being animated by the same American studios that handled the earlier shows. The bulk of the animation is being done by a French studio called La Chouette Compagnie. The visual style people keep pointing to is heavily influenced by the French comics artist Jean Giraud, who most people know by his pen name Mobius, along with a strong current of 1990s anime. If you know Mobius at all, you know that is a very particular look, clean lines, enormous strange landscapes, a sense of scale that makes people small against the world. For a story about a shattered planet where civilization only survives in a handful of fortified pockets, that influence is almost too fitting. The world itself is going to be a character, and they have chosen a visual language built for making worlds feel vast and lonely and old. A few more are the people behind it, because these names are the connective tissue that tells you this is not a stranger wearing the franchise's clothes. The composer is Jeremy Zuckerman, who scored both The Last Airbender and Korra. If you have ever felt your chest tighten at that particular blend of Chinese and Tibetan and Inuit musical textures that the earlier shows used, that was him, and he is coming back. The executive producers include DiMartino and Konietzko themselves, along with Ethan Spalding and Sehaj Sethi. The supervising director is Alexandra Chu. The character designer, whose early art started surfacing on Instagram well before most of the official reveals, is Sarah Kippin, and the production is credited jointly to Avatar Studios and Nickelodeon Animation Studio. So you have a French animation house giving it a new visual soul, and the original creative core giving it continuity, and a returning composer carrying the emotional sensibility of the shows you already love. That combination is the whole pitch, really. Familiar hands, unfamiliar world. What I keep circling back to is that word, unfamiliar, because every other piece of Avatar has been, at its core, a story about a world worth saving that is basically intact. A war, yes, an occupation, a spiritual imbalance, but a recognizable world with 4 nations and known borders. Seven Havens opens on the other side of an ending. The world these characters live in has already broken, and that single choice, to begin after the catastrophe rather than before it, is what makes this feel less like a continuation and more like waking up in the same universe a very long time later and finding it changed almost beyond recognition. That is the ground we are standing on tonight, and before we can walk out onto it, I want to trace exactly how we got here, from the first whispered leaks to the trailer that dropped just days ago. The road to Seven Havens really begins with a quieter piece of news that most casual fans never registered. In February of 2021, Nickelodeon announced that it was founding a whole new division, Avatar Studios, dedicated entirely to expanding this one franchise across film and television. That was the moment the machine started turning. For years before that, Avatar had lived in a strange limbo, beloved, endlessly rewatched, streamed by a whole new generation who discovered it during the lockdowns of 2020 and yet not actually producing anything new on screen. The founding of Avatar Studios was the signal that the world was going to keep growing, with DiMartino and Konietzko installed as its chief creative officers. What it did not tell anyone was what the first big series out of that studio would be. That stayed hidden for a long time. The first cracks of information came, as they so often do now, through leaks. Late in 2024, descriptions started circulating online of a new Avatar project involving twin sisters who were Earthbenders, one of whom was the new Avatar. The leaks floated other details too, including an age, a claim that the twins were around 9 years old, and this deserves a plain warning, because that number is exactly the kind of thing that gets repeated until it hardens into fact. It came from a leak. It has not been confirmed on screen. When we get to the characters properly, treat their ages as an open question, not a settled one. But the core of that early leak, twin Earthbender sisters, and one of them the Avatar, turned out to be startlingly accurate, which is its own small lesson in how tightly or loosely these productions hold their secrets. Then came the official reveal, and the timing of it is the kind of detail that tells you these people understand exactly what they are custodians of. On February 20th, 2025, the series was announced to the public. That date is not random. It was the 20th anniversary of the premiere of the very first episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, which first aired on February 21st, 2005. 2 decades, almost to the day, from The Boy in the Iceberg to the announcement of the next Avatar entirely. And they did not deliver that announcement through a cold press release. They handed it to 2 voices the fandom already trusts completely. Janet Varney, the voice of Korra herself, and Dante Basco, the voice of Zuko, who together host a rewatch podcast called Avatar: Braving the Elements. Letting Korra's own voice actor be the one to tell you there is a new Avatar coming is a small, deliberate, almost tender piece of stagecraft. It says, this is still your show, delivered by people who have lived inside it. From there, the reveals came slowly and on the franchise's own favorite stage, San Diego Comic-Con. In July of 2025, the first real look at the new Avatar arrived, a single character image of a girl named Pavi. Just a picture, but enough to start every conversation. Because you could already see the details that would become talking points, the earthy palette, the young face, and something at her leg that people immediately began asking about. And then, a full year later, on July 23rd of 2026, just days before I'm recording this, the real thing landed. The first teaser trailer, plus the confirmed premiere date of October 9th, and it arrived at Comic-Con alongside the panel for the new animated Aang film, which we will get to. So the shape of the rollout, when you lay it end to end, is patient in a way modern franchises rarely are. A studio founded in 2021, leaks in late 2024, an anniversary reveal in early 2025, a character image that summer. and a full year of near silence before the teaser finally gave people something moving to look at. 4 years from the studio's founding to a trailer, that is not a franchise being rushed to market. That is a franchise being built. I think that patience is an underrated part of this whole story, and it is the part almost nobody talks about. In an era where continuations get greenlit, produced, and dumped within 18 months to catch a wave of nostalgia before it breaks, Avatar Studios spent years mostly saying nothing. And the little they did say, they said with care, on meaningful dates, through trusted voices. Whether the series itself lives up to that care is a question none of us can answer yet, because we have seen a teaser and read a logline, and that is genuinely all. But the way they have handled the approach tells you they know exactly how much these characters mean to people, and they are trying not to fumble it. Now let me actually tell you what that teaser and that logline reveal, because the premise of Seven Havens is where this stops being a familiar Avatar story and becomes something the franchise has never tried before. Here is the premise as it has been officially described, and I'm going to stay close to the confirmed wording because this is the load-bearing center of everything. The series is set in a world that has been shattered by a devastating cataclysm, some kind of apocalyptic event that broke the world we knew. In the aftermath of that event, civilization no longer stretches across the map the way it once did. It survives only in 7 places, the 7 havens of the title, described as the central pillars of civilization, the last strongholds, fortified safe zones scattered across an otherwise ruined world. Everything outside those havens is, by implication, no longer somewhere people can simply live. And into this broken world, a young earthbender discovers that she is the new Avatar, the reincarnation who comes after Korra. But the discovery does not make her a savior in anyone's eyes. In this world, the title of Avatar marks her as humanity's destroyer, not its protector. She is feared, she is hunted, and the enemies hunting her are not only human. She is pursued by human and spirit foes alike. Alongside her long-lost twin sister, she has to uncover the mystery of their own origins and try to save the 7 havens before those last strongholds collapse entirely. Read that back and count how many of the franchise's foundations it quietly inverts. The Avatar has always been, across 2 shows and countless generations of lore, the one figure the world could turn to. Flawed, yes, young and overwhelmed, and sometimes deeply resented by specific enemies, but fundamentally the bridge, the peacekeeper, the balance. The entire emotional architecture of both earlier series rests on the idea that the Avatar's job is to protect the world, and that the world, deep down, needs and eventually recognizes that. 7 Havens takes that and turns it inside out. Here, the Avatar is the boogeyman, the name that mothers presumably used to frighten children, the living symbol of the thing that ended the world. That is not a small twist. That is the show reaching into the deepest assumption the franchise has and pulling it out by the root. And I have to say, that is the choice that made me actually excited rather than just curious, because it is not a safe choice. A nostalgia engine plays the hits. This is not playing the hits. This is asking what happens when the hero is the most hated person alive. Now, the responsible thing to say, and I am going to keep saying it tonight because it matters, is that the logline is almost the entire story we officially have. We know the world is broken. We do not know how it broke. We know she is called a destroyer. We do not know whether that reputation is earned, inherited, or an outright lie that the survivors tell themselves. We know there is a twin. We do not know the twin's role, her alignment, or the truth of their shared origin. The logline is a doorway, and everything past it is still dark. So when you see confident videos and posts explaining exactly what the Cataclysm was, and exactly what happened to Korra, and exactly who the villain is, hold them at arm's length. Because as of right now, the people making it have not told us those things. They have shown us a ruined world, a hunted girl, a lost sister, and a title that has become a curse. That is the honest boundary of what we know. But even inside that boundary, there are threads worth pulling, because the premise does not exist in a vacuum. It sits on top of everything that happened in the 2 shows before it. And a lot of the questions the logline raises actually have partial answers if you understand the world that produced them. Why is the new Avatar an earthbender specifically? What does it mean that she comes after Korra and not after Aang? Why would a world ever come to fear the Avatar when for 10,000 years, the Avatar was the one thing holding chaos at bay? To answer those, I have to step back from 7 Havens for a while and rebuild the foundation underneath it. the avatar itself, what it is, how it works, and how the world got to the strange, merged, unstable place it was in when Korra's story ended. Because the Cataclysm did not come from nowhere. The seeds of it were planted in plain sight years ago, and once you see them, the whole premise of Seven Havens starts to feel less like a random apocalypse and more like a bill finally coming due. So let me build that foundation from the ground up, starting with the single idea the whole franchise turns on. The Avatar is one soul that is reborn over and over across the 4 nations of the world. In this world, people are divided by the element they can bend, that is, physically manipulate with a kind of martial spiritual discipline. There are waterbenders, earthbenders, firebenders, and airbenders, and almost everyone who can bend at all can bend only their one native element for their entire life. The Avatar is the single exception. The Avatar is the only person who can learn to bend all 4, and the Avatar is not a title you train for or inherit or earn. It is a soul. When one Avatar dies, that same essence is reborn into the next nation in a fixed order, into a newborn who will grow up, discover the truth, and spend a lifetime trying to keep the 4 nations and the spirit world in balance. So the Avatar is at once a person and a continuity, a single individual and a chain stretching back thousands of years, each life a bead on the same thread. The reason that soul can move between worlds and lifetimes at all comes down to a fusion that happened at the very beginning. And this is where the mythology gets truly beautiful. The first Avatar was a man named Wan, and his story was told in Korra's 2nd season in a 2-part flashback that a lot of people quietly consider some of the best material the whole franchise ever produced. 10,000 years before Aang, the human and spirit worlds were not separated the way they later became. Humans lived huddled on the backs of enormous creatures called lion turtles, who could grant a person the power of an element temporarily for protection when they ventured out into the wilds where the spirits lived. Wan was a thief and a trickster who ended up exiled into those wilds, learned to live among the spirits, and eventually came upon 2 of them locked in an eternal struggle. One was Rava, the spirit of light and peace. The other was Vatu, the spirit of darkness and chaos. Wan, meaning well and understanding nothing, interfered, and in doing so he accidentally let Vatu loose to begin plunging the world into darkness. To fix his mistake, Wan bonded permanently with Rava, fusing his human soul to the spirit of light, and together they became something new, a human who could carry a spirit inside him, master all 4 elements, and stand against the chaos Vatu spread. That fusion is the Avatar. At the end of that first great struggle, Wan locked Vatu away and closed the passages between the 2 worlds to keep the darkness contained, separating the 2 worlds for what would become 10,000 years. And I want to correct something here that even careful fans get wrong, because it matters for how you read this character. Wan did not die young and burned out. He lived a long life, something on the order of 160 years. And he died an old man on a battlefield, already dying, lying alone with Rava, apologizing to her that in all his long life he never managed to bring the lasting peace he wanted. He was not shown fighting at the very end. He was shown spent and grieving and human. And it was Rava who made him the promise, not the other way around, that she would be with him through every one of his future lives. From that moment, his soul began to move through the world, reborn again and again, and every Avatar who ever lived, Aang, Korra, and all the countless names between and before them, is the continuation of the bond Wan formed in that wilderness. I find that origin quietly devastating, and it is the part of the mythology that I think Seven Havens is most likely to be built on top of, because it establishes 2 things that will matter enormously. First, that the separation of the human and spirit worlds was a deliberate act, a wall Wan built to protect people from chaos. And second, that the Avatar's entire purpose, from the very first breath of the very first Avatar, was balance. Holding the light against the dark, holding the worlds in their proper places. Keep both of those in your mind, the wall between the worlds and the job of keeping balance, because Korra, thousands of years later, made a choice that undid the first one. And a world where the Avatar is feared as a destroyer is a world where the second one has somehow gone catastrophically wrong. The whole tragedy of Seven Havens, whatever its exact shape turns out to be, is written in the tension between what the Avatar was created to do and what this new Avatar is accused of having caused. There is one more piece of the foundation to lay before I can explain why Pavi is an earthbender, and why that detail is so satisfying, and that is the order itself, the cycle, the fixed sequence in which the avatar is reborn from nation to nation. It sounds like a technicality. It is actually the reason we could have predicted, years ago, exactly what kind of bender the next avatar would be. The cycle runs in a fixed order, and that order traces all the way back to Wan because it follows the sequence in which he first learned to bend the elements. The order is fire, then air, then water, then earth, and then it repeats, fire again, and around forever. So every avatar is born into the nation that comes next in that wheel. When a fire avatar dies, the next is born an airbender. When an air avatar dies, the next is a waterbender. When a water avatar dies, the next is an earthbender. And when an earth avatar dies, the wheel comes back around to fire. It is a closed loop, and it has held with only the strangest exceptions for 10,000 years. Now walk it forward through the avatars we actually know. Before Aang, there was Roku, and Roku was a firebender, born in the Fire Nation, boyhood friend of the man who would eventually become the tyrant whose war shaped the entire first series. Roku is fire. When Roku died, the cycle turned to air, and the next avatar was born among the air nomads. That was Aang, the airbending boy at the center of the last airbender. Aang is air. When Aang eventually died, generations later, the cycle turned again to water, and the next avatar was born in the Southern Water Tribe. That was Korra, and this is the detail people constantly get wrong, so let me be exact about it. Korra is a waterbender. Her native element, the one she was born able to bend, is water. Some articles casually describe her as a firebender, or muddle her up. And it matters here, because the entire logic of what comes next depends on it. Korra is water, and after water, in the fixed order, comes earth. So the next avatar after Korra, by the oldest rule in the world, has to be an earthbender. Roku, fire. Aang, air. Korra, water. Next, earth. And the new avatar of Seven Havens, Pavi, is an earthbender. She fits the cycle exactly. This is the kind of continuity detail I love because it is not a wink or an Easter egg, it is the machinery of the world working precisely as it always has. Anyone who understood the cycle knew, the moment the leaks described an earthbender avatar, that this was not a mistake or a rewrite. It was the wheel turning to the next spoke, right on schedule. Water gives way to earth, and earth is Pavi, and there is something poetically right about the element landing on earth for this particular story. Though I should be clear that this next part is my reading, not something the series has stated. Earth, in the philosophy, the franchise built around bending, is the element of substance, of endurance, of standing your ground and waiting. Toph, the greatest earthbender the shows ever gave us, embodied it, immovable, stubborn, rooted. For a story set in a world reduced to rubble, where the last islands of civilization are fortified strongholds trying not to be washed away, an avatar whose native element is the very ground beneath everyone's feet feels almost thematically inevitable. The world is crumbling, and the one who might hold it together bends the one thing everyone is standing on. Again, that is interpretation. The writers have not framed it that way. But the cycle placing an earthbender at exactly this moment is the kind of accident that stops feeling like an accident. The cycle also has one more consequence that goes almost unmentioned, and it points at how alone this new avatar might be. Because the cycle is unbroken across 10,000 years, an avatar has always had somewhere to reach. When Aang needed guidance, he could sit in meditation and reach back to Roku, and Roku could reach back to the avatar before him, all the way down the chain. The past lives are a resource, a council of thousands of former selves the current avatar can consult in the deepest moments of crisis. That connection to the past is one of the avatar's greatest gifts, arguably the greatest, a lifeline of accumulated wisdom stretching to the beginning of the world. And that lifeline for the avatar who comes after Korra is severed, cut, gone. To understand why and why it isolates Pavi in a way no avatar before her has ever been isolated, I have to tell you what happened to Korra in the darkest chapter of her own story. Because it is the piece of legacy that Seven Havens most heavily inherits. In the second book of the legend of Korra, the story returned to Ra'ava and Vatu, the spirits of light and darkness that Wan bonded with at the dawn of the Avatar. There is a phenomenon in that world called harmonic convergence, a rare alignment that happens once every 10,000 years when the spiritual energy of the planet reaches a peak and the barrier between the human and spirit worlds thins to almost nothing. The last time it had happened was the era of Wan, and Korra's uncle, a man named Unalaq, had spent years scheming to use that convergence not to protect the world, but to free Vaatu and fuse with him, becoming a dark mirror of the Avatar, a dark avatar carrying the spirit of chaos the way the Avatar carries the spirit of light. He succeeded, at least part way, and in the confrontation that followed, the worst possible thing happened to Korra. Vaatu, fused with Unalaq, got hold of Rava, the spirit of light living inside Korra, the spirit that makes her the Avatar at all. And he tore Rava out of her, and then he began to destroy her, beating the light spirit apart while Korra was helpless. And in that destruction, something was lost that has never been recovered. Because Rava is the thread. Rava is the continuity that connects every avatar to every avatar before. When Vaatu shattered Rava, he severed Korra's connection to all of her past lives at once. Aang, Roku, Wan, the entire chain of thousands of predecessors stretching back 10,000 years, gone, cut off in an instant. It is one of the quietly cruel things the franchise ever did to a character, because it did not just hurt Korra, it erased her inheritance. Everyone who had ever been the Avatar vanished from her reach in a single moment of violence. Korra did win in the end. With help, she restored Rava, defeated the Dark Avatar, and remained the Avatar. But the restored Rava was, in a sense, new. The link to the past lives did not come back. From that point on, Korra was the beginning of a new Avatar line, not the latest link in the old one. She could no longer sit in meditation and call up Aang for advice. The Council of Thousands was silent for her. And this is the fact I need you to carry into Seven Havens, because it changes everything about the new Avatar situation. When the Avatar cycle continued after Korra, it continued from that severed point, which means Pavi, the new Earthbender Avatar, cannot spiritually reach Aang. She cannot reach Roku, she cannot reach Wan or Kyoshi or any of the thousands of avatars whose lives make up the deep history of the world. The only predecessor she can reach, the only past life on the other end of that thread, is Korra. Think about what that does to a young avatar dropped into a broken world where everyone hates her. Every avatar before Korra had, in their darkest hour, a chorus of former selves to consult. A literal accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years. Pavi has one predecessor, and that one predecessor is, if the teaser is any indication, the very avatar the world blames for ending it. So the only guidance available to the new avatar comes from the exact person whose reputation has become a curse. If Pavi reaches inward for help, the face she finds is Korra's, and Korra is the name this world spits. That is an extraordinary setup, and it is not fan invention. It is the direct mechanical consequence of what happened in Korra's second book. The show has not confirmed how it will use this, but the pieces are all sitting there in the established canon, and they point at a loneliness no previous avatar has ever had to carry. The lifeline that every avatar for 10,000 years could pull on has been cut down to a single strand, and that strand leads back to the avatar the whole world blames. I keep coming back to how deliberate this feels. The severed connection was written into Korra years before anyone dreamed of Seven Havens as a tragedy specific to her. And now, whether by long planning or by the creators recognizing the gift their younger selves left them, it has become the structural bedrock of an entirely new series. The new avatar is alone in a way the rules of the world would not otherwise allow, and she is alone because of something that happened to her predecessor in a fight over the spirit of light itself. But the severed past lives are only half of what Korra left behind. The other half is a decision she made at the very end of that same book, a decision that everyone praised at the time as an act of hope and healing, and which may turn out to be the single act that broke the world. At the end of Korra's second book, after she had defeated the Dark Avatar and restored Rava, she stood at the two spirit portals, the passages between the human and spirit worlds, the very passages that Wan had sealed 10,000 years earlier to keep chaos contained. And Korra made a choice that no avatar before her had ever made. She decided not to close them again. She left both spirit portals open. Her reasoning was hopeful, even beautiful. She had come to believe that keeping the two worlds walled off from each other had been a mistake, that humanity had grown spiritually poorer for losing its connection to the spirits, that the separation Wan built to protect people had also impoverished them. So she chose to let the worlds reconnect. She left the doors open on purpose, ending 10,000 years of separation and inviting spirits back into the human world to live alongside people. The immediate consequences of that choice played out across the rest of her series, and some of them were really wonderful. Spirits returned to the human world. A patch of spirit wilds grew up in the middle of the largest human city, and extraordinarily, a whole new generation of airbenders began to appear, people who had never been able to bend air suddenly manifesting the ability, replenishing the air nomads who had been all but wiped out generations before. A new air nation was reborn out of that changed spiritual landscape. At the time, it read as healing. The world Korra left at the end of her story was more connected, more spiritual, more balanced between human and spirit than it had been since the dawn of the Avatar. That was the note her series ended on, a world knitting itself back together. But step back and look at what actually happened structurally, and a colder reading emerges. Korra took a wall that had stood for 10,000 years, a wall the first Avatar built specifically to keep the two worlds from bleeding into each other, and she tore it down. She merged two worlds that had been deliberately kept apart since the beginning of history, and she did it essentially in a single lifetime on the strength of her own conviction that it was the right thing. Now, I am not going to tell you that this is definitely what caused the Cataclysm in Seven Havens, because the creators have not said that, and I want to be very clear that the connection is not confirmed. But almost every outlet writing about Seven Havens has drawn the same line, and it is not hard to see why. You have a world that has been shattered by a devastating cataclysm, apparently tied to some kind of collision or catastrophic merging of the spirit and physical worlds. And you have, sitting right there in the established canon, the moment the Avatar herself threw open the doors between those two worlds and left them open. If you were writing a tragedy about how the world ended, that open door is the obvious place to start. And this is where the whole shape of Seven Havens starts to feel less like an apocalypse that happened to the Avatar, and more like an apocalypse the Avatar caused, which would explain in the cruelest possible way why the survivors blame her. Imagine living in the Seven Havens, in the ruins of a world that used to be whole, and being told the story of how it ended. The Avatar opened the doors between the worlds, the spirits came through, and then something went wrong, and the sky broke, and the land became unlivable, and now you huddle in the last 7 strongholds while spirits and worse things roam the wilds outside your walls. From inside that story, the Avatar is not a savior who failed. The Avatar is the arsonist. Whether or not that is literally true in the show, it is the story the world seems to be telling itself, and it is a story that Korra's own choices make horribly plausible. I want to hold the interpretation and the fact apart here cleanly because this is precisely where confident nonsense spreads. The fact is that Korra left the spirit portals open at the end of her second book, ending the 10,000-year separation of the worlds. The fact is that Seven Havens takes place in a world broken by a cataclysm that outlets consistently describe as tied to a spirit and physical world collision. The interpretation, mine and a lot of other people's, is that these two facts are almost certainly connected, that Korra's act of hope curdled over the intervening years into catastrophe, and the speculation, which I will flag clearly as speculation, is any specific account of how that happened. What spirit or force or disaster turned an open door into an ending? The show has not told us, but the door is open in the canon right now, waiting. And a bill that was signed at the end of Korra's story may be exactly the bill coming due at the start of Pavi's. There is one more twist to hold in mind, and it is an honestly unsettling one. Some of the writing around Seven Havens suggests that the story blaming the Avatar for the cataclysm may itself be false, or at least distorted, a narrative that hardened over years into accepted history without being true. That is speculation, and I flag it as such, but it is a rich possibility, because it would mean the new Avatar is hunted for a crime that either her predecessor did not commit or that has been twisted beyond recognition. A world can be wrong about its own history. Grief looks for someone to blame, and the Avatar, the single figure everyone in the world can name, the one soul connected to the spirit world everyone now fears, makes an almost irresistible target. So the question Seven Haven seems to be built around is not only what happened to the world, but whether the world even understands what happened to it. And underneath that sits the figure everyone points at, the last avatar, the one whose glowing eyes flash through the teaser. So let me turn to her directly about what we actually know regarding Korra's fate, and how much of what people are saying is real. Start with the one thing the rules of the world guarantee. There can only ever be one living avatar at a time. The soul does not reincarnate until the current avatar dies. That is not a soft guideline. It is the fundamental mechanic of the cycle, the reason there is a single unbroken thread rather than a tangle. So the mere existence of Pavi, a new avatar walking around inside the broken world Seven Havens shows us, tells you something with certainty even before the series explains a single frame of it. Korra is gone. She has passed on. The cycle has moved to Earth, which means the water avatar's life has ended. You do not need a leak or a trailer to know that. The moment they told us there is a new avatar after Korra, they told us, by the ironclad logic of the world, that Korra is no longer alive. What we do not know, and what I want to be very careful about, is how she died, or when, or under what circumstances. There's a great deal of speculation floating around, some of it presented with far more confidence than the evidence supports. You will see people state flatly that Korra was killed by the very people she tried to protect, that she died fighting the Cataclysm, that she was executed by the survivors of the Havens as revenge for the end of the world. I have to be honest with you, none of that is confirmed. Those are fan reads, some of them born from a single ambiguous shot in the teaser, some from wishful narrative logic, and they may all turn out to be completely wrong. The show has told us that Korra is gone and that the world blames the Avatar. It has not told us the manner of her death. When someone narrates Korra's final moments to you in vivid detail right now, they are writing fan fiction, however plausible it sounds. What the teaser does show, according to the reporting on it, is Korra in the Avatar state, her eyes glowing that unmistakable white amid scenes of destruction. And that image is doing a lot of quiet work. The Avatar state is the Avatar's most powerful mode, the moment when the current Avatar draws on the accumulated power of the reincarnation itself, glowing eyes, tremendous force. The state Aang enters in his most desperate confrontations. Seeing Korra in that state, surrounded by ruin, is a direct visual line back to the legend of Korra, and it strongly suggests that whatever ended the world happened during or around some final, catastrophic exertion of Korra's power. But suggests is the operative word. We are reading an image, not a confirmed plot point. It could be a memory, it could be a vision Pavi experiences. It could be a flashback to the Cataclysm itself. It could be the world's distorted mythology made visible, the way people imagine the moment everything broke. The teaser gives us the image and withholds the meaning, which is exactly what a good teaser does. There is a further piece of speculation I have seen repeated enough that I want to name it and then set it in its proper place, which is the claim that Korra lost her Avatar state or lost her connection to the cycle before the end. I flag that as unconfirmed framing. It is the kind of premise element that some outlets have floated and others have not, and there is no official statement pinning it down. It would fit thematically. A world where the Avatar's power failed at the crucial moment would be a world primed to lose faith in the Avatar entirely. But fitting thematically is not the same as being confirmed, and I'm not going to hand it to you as fact. Hold it as a maybe, one of many maybes clustered around a character whose fate is deliberately being kept in shadow until the story is ready. Here is what I find actually moving about all of this, and it is the reaction I keep having every time I sit with the setup. Korra's series ended on hope. The final image of the legend of Korra is famously tender, a moment of connection and new beginnings, a character who had been broken down across 4 seasons finally standing in something like peace. For a lot of people, that ending was hard-won and precious, the payoff of watching a deeply flawed, deeply human Avatar struggle through trauma and doubt and come out the other side. And Seven Havens appears to reach past that ending into a future where it all came apart, where the hopeful world Korra built collapsed, and where her name became a curse in the mouths of the people she died believing she could save. That is a bleak inheritance to hand a beloved character. Whether the series is cruel to Korra or ultimately redeems her, whether it confirms the world's blame or exposes it as a lie, is the emotional question at the center of the whole thing. And the fact that they are willing to go there at all to touch the ending fans hold most tightly and complicate it tells you Seven Havens is not interested in being comfortable. It is going to make us look at what happened after the happy ending. Now let me turn from the avatar who is gone to the avatar who is here, the girl at the center of all of it, and everything we actually know about Pavi. Her name is Pavi, and she is the new Earthbender avatar, the reincarnation who comes after Korra. She lives in a city called Elora, and I want to pause on that spelling for a second because it is one of those places where the reporting has been messy. You will see the city rendered as Allura or Elora in some outlets, and those are best treated as errors or early guesses. The spelling that the Avatar Wiki and Wikipedia settled on, and the one I will use, is Elora. So Pavi of Elora, the Earthbender who wakes up to the knowledge that she is the most feared person in the world. That is our protagonist. The design, which we have had a look at since that first character image at Comic-Con in 2025, tells you a fair amount about who they want her to be. She is a young, brown-skinned girl with dark hair and green eyes, dressed in a palette of earthy greens and browns. The green eyes are a nice touch of continuity because green is the color long associated with the Earth Kingdom, and with earthbending across the whole franchise, the way blue belongs to water and red to fire. So even at a glance, before you know anything about her, the design is telling you which element she belongs to. She reads as Earth from the first frame, rooted in that palette of soil and stone and moss. She looks, in the best way, like she grew out of the ground she can bend. But the detail everyone fixed on, the moment that first image appeared, is at her leg. Pavi is an amputee. She is missing her left leg, and in its place she has a wooden prosthetic. This has been reported as a real first for the franchise, the first avatar with a permanent physical disability. And that is not a small thing, either as a character choice or as a piece of representation, and I want to give it the space it deserves rather than rushing past it. The Avatar, across 10,000 years of lore, has always been in some sense the pinnacle of physical and spiritual capability. The one person who can bend all four elements, master of the body and the spirit alike. To make the newest holder of that role someone who navigates the world on a wooden leg is a deliberate, meaningful inversion of the idea that power and physical wholeness have to go together. She is the most powerful being in the world by birthright, and she is also, physically, someone the old fantasy would never have chosen. Those two things living in one character is a sincerely interesting statement, and it is not out of character for this franchise, which is part of why it lands rather than feeling like a bolt-on. Avatar has a real tradition of disabled heroes who are defined by capability rather than pity. The most obvious is Toph, the greatest earthbender the show's ever produced, who is blind, and whose blindness is not a weakness to be overcome, but the very thing that shaped her singular way of sensing the world through the earth, feeling vibrations through her feet, a perception no sighted bender had. There is also Teo, a boy who uses a wheelchair and who flies, gliding on the wind currents around his home. The franchise has long understood that a disability can be a doorway to a different kind of mastery, not a subtraction from a character, but a whole different geometry of how they meet the world. So an amputee avatar who bends the earth, an avatar whose relationship to the ground beneath her is literally mediated by a wooden leg carved from a tree, sits comfortably in that lineage. I am curious, deeply curious, whether the show will connect her prosthetic to her bending the way Toph's blindness was connected to hers. Whether the earth will be something she feels through that wooden leg in a way no one else can. Nothing official confirms that. It is the kind of thing I hope for, rather than know. I should also be honest about what we do not know regarding how she lost the leg, because this is another place where rumor has rushed to fill a vacuum. You will see claims that she lost it in a childhood accident, or that it was tied to the Cataclysm, or to the twins' mysterious origin. All of that is outlet speculation and fan theory, not confirmed backstory. The show has shown us that she has a prosthetic. It has not told us the story behind it. Given that her origins are described as a central mystery of the series, it seems entirely possible the loss of her leg is woven into that mystery. But I am not going to invent the thread for you. What we know is the fact of the prosthetic. The story of it is still sealed. Her voice is provided by an actor named Saheli Khan, and the casting across the whole show, which I will get into properly in a moment, leans into performers of South Asian heritage, which pairs with the visual influences and the names in a way that suggests the world of Seven Havens may draw on cultural textures the earlier shows touched less. That is worth stating plainly and neutrally as a production fact. The franchise has always built its four nations out of real-world cultures, primarily East Asian and Inuit and South Asian sources woven together, and the specific blend shifts from series to series. The names in Seven Havens, Pavi, Nisha, Jay, Agam, and the rest, alongside the casting, point toward a particular cultural center of gravity for this new world, though the writers have not spelled out how its post-Cataclysm societies map onto anything we knew before. What strikes me most about Pavi as a protagonist, standing back from the individual details, is how completely her situation inverts the classic Avatar journey. Aang woke up from the iceberg to find a world at war that still, fundamentally, wanted the Avatar back, that had been waiting 100 years for him. Korra arrived in a world that revered the Avatar even when it resented her specific choices. Both of them, for all their struggles, were the answer the world was looking for. Pavi is the answer nobody wants. She discovers she is the Avatar, and the discovery is a death sentence, a mark, the worst possible news. The entire emotional starting position of her story is loneliness and danger rather than destiny and welcome, and she carries it on a wooden leg with only one severed predecessor to reach for, in a world that would rather she had never been born. That is a heavy thing to hang on a young girl, and it is exactly the kind of heavy thing this franchise has always been unusually good at handling with grace. She is not alone in the story, though, and the person closest to her may also be the show's deepest mystery. So let me talk about the twin. Pavi has a twin sister named Nisha, and Nisha is voiced by an actor called Aishu Devon. What we officially know is spare but tantalizing. Nisha is Pavi's long-lost twin, which tells you the two of them were separated at some point, and that reunion, or the search for one, is part of the story. Nisha is also an earthbender, like her sister, and the logline places the two of them together at the very center of the plot, the twins setting out to uncover their mysterious origins and save the Seven Havens. So the emotional core of the series seems to be, at least in part, a story about two sisters, torn apart, trying to understand where they came from and why the world is the way it is. That framing, twin sisters at the center of an apocalypse, is exactly what the earliest leaks described back in 2024. And it is one of the few big structural things that has held steady from rumor all the way to official confirmation. Now here is where I have to be extremely careful, because this is the single biggest place where fan enthusiasm has run ahead of the facts, and I do not want to add to the confusion. Only Pavi is confirmed to be the Avatar. Nisha is not. I know how tempting the other reading is. Twin sisters, both earthbenders, one of them the Avatar, a world built on the balance of light and dark, of Ra'ava and Vatu. It is almost irresistible to imagine that Nisha is somehow the other half of a cosmic pair, a dark avatar to Pavi's light, a yin to her yang, the two of them two halves of something split at birth. Fans have absolutely theorized exactly that, and I understand why. It is a gorgeous idea, and it rhymes with the deepest mythology of the franchise. But it is a theory. Nothing official confirms that Nisha is an avatar, or a dark avatar, or anything other than Pavi's twin sister who also bends Earth. And remember the ironclad rule I keep returning to: only one avatar exists at a time. For both twins to be avatars at once, the series would have to explicitly rewrite one of the deepest laws of its own universe, and it has given no indication that it intends to. So please, when you hear someone say the twins are both avatars, hear that as a fan dream, not a fact. The confirmed picture is simpler and honestly plenty interesting on its own. One avatar, one ordinary earthbending twin, separated and reunited in a broken world. The rest of what people say about Nisha follows the same pattern, plausible stories filling the gaps that the series has left open. You will hear that the twins were separated at birth, that one was raised in privilege by the White Lotus, the secret society that has served the Avatar across the franchise, while the other grew up on the streets, that Nisha resents Pavi or protects her or has been turned against her. You will hear elaborate accounts of which sister lost her leg and why. I want to name all of that clearly as speculation and rumor. None of it is confirmed backstory. The show has told us that they are twins, that they were separated, that they are both earthbenders, and that their origins are a mystery they have to solve together. Everything past that, every detail about how they were separated and who raised them and how they feel about each other, is currently being written by fans, not by the creators. It might turn out to be right. Fans have guessed right about this show before. But a good guess is still a guess. What I find quietly brilliant about the twins setup, setting the theories aside, is how much dramatic pressure it creates just from the confirmed facts. Think about it. One sister is the avatar, the person this whole world most wants dead, hunted by humans and spirits, blamed for the apocalypse. The other sister is her twin, physically her mirror, the person who looks most like her in all the world. In a world where being recognized as the avatar could get you killed, having a twin is both a comfort and a terrible danger. Nisha could be mistaken for Pavi. Nisha could shield her or expose her or be hunted in her place. The mere fact of an identical or near-identical sibling in a world where your face is a death warrant is a plot engine all by itself, before you add a single theory on top of it. And underneath that is the quieter ache the logline gestures at. Two sisters who were separated and do not fully know their own story, trying to find each other and themselves in the ruins. You do not need them both to be avatars for that to be a rich, painful human center. Sometimes the confirmed version is better than the theory, and I think this might be one of those times. There is one more thing to hold about the twins that the creators have been quite pointed about, which is that their origins are described as a central mystery, not a bit of backstory, but a driving question of the plot. That phrasing, mysterious origins, is doing deliberate work. It tells you that where Pavi and Nisha came from is not going to be a simple flashback in the first episode. It is going to be a thread they pull across the series, and it is very likely tangled up with the Cataclysm, with Korra, with the reason the Avatar came back as twins at all, if there even is a reason. The show is promising us that these two girls do not fully understand themselves, and that understanding themselves is the same act as understanding what happened to the world. That is a strong classic structure, the personal mystery and the cosmic mystery turning out to be one mystery. And it means almost everything about the twins' past is being deliberately withheld, which is exactly why there is so much room for theories to grow. Now the twins are not alone either. There is a third figure who travels with them, and he carries a piece of the old world with him. So let me introduce the rest of the people we know are in this story. The third member of the core group is named Jay, and Jay is an airbender. He is described as Pavi's mentor and friend, and he lives with her in Allura. He is voiced by an actor named Major Kurda. Now, the fact that Jay is an airbender is a lovely thread of continuity, and it is easy to miss why. Remember that the air nomads were almost entirely wiped out generations before Aang's story. That Aang spent his whole series believing he might be the last airbender alive, which is where the first show gets its name. And remember that at the end of Korra's story, with the spirit portals thrown open and the spiritual balance of the world shifting, a whole new generation of airbenders spontaneously appeared, reborn out of that changed world, forming a new air nation. So an airbender existing at all in the era of Seven Havens is a direct descendant, spiritually and possibly literally, of that revival. Jay being an airbender means the new air nation survived in some form into this broken future. The mentor at Pavi's side carries the legacy of the element that was nearly lost twice over, once in the genocide before Aang and once in the long centuries between. There is something fitting about the frailest, most nearly extinct of the four traditions being the one that endures to guide the new avatar. I also find it telling that the series gives the earthbender avatar an airbending mentor, because that is the exact inverse of the very first series. Aang was an airbender who most needed to learn earthbending, the element most opposed to his own nature, patient and immovable where air is free and evasive. Here, the arrangement is flipped, an earthbender being guided by an airbender, and while I am reading into it, that inversion feels of a piece with everything else about this show, which keeps taking the familiar shapes of the franchise and turning them over. Whether Jay actually teaches Pavi airbending or simply mentors her in the role of avatar, we do not know. His exact function beyond mentor and friend has not been detailed. But an airbender walking beside an earthbender through the ruins is a nice, quiet echo of where the whole thing began. Then there are the animal companions, because no Avatar story is complete without them, and this is one of the sweetest confirmed details. Pavi and Nisha each have a creature called a cat monkey. Pavi's is named Geet, and Nisha's is named Ruhi, and both of them are voiced by D. Bradley Baker. If you have watched either earlier series, that name should make you smile, because D. Bradley Baker is the man who has voiced practically every animal in the entire franchise. He was Appa, Aang's enormous flying bison, and Momo, the little winged lemur in The Last Airbender. He was Naga, Korra's polar bear dog, in The Legend of Korra. He is the sound of the animal soul of this world, and he is coming back to voice the new cat monkeys. That is not a plot point exactly, but it is the sort of continuity that tells you the people making this care about the texture of the thing, that the creatures of Seven Havens will feel like they belong to the same living world as Appa and Momo and Naga, because they are voiced by the same person who gave those creatures their breath and their chirps and their sighs. The animal companions have always been the emotional anchor of these shows, the wordless friends who love the avatar without agenda. And in a story this bleak, two cat monkeys named Geet and Ruhi might be the softest thing in it. Beyond that core, there are several more names in the confirmed voice cast. And here I have to be careful again because we have the actors and the character names, but in most cases not the roles. There is a character named Karthik, voiced by Akshay Khanna. Some outlets have speculated that Karthik is a captain, a mentor figure of some kind, but the captain detail and the mentor role are unconfirmed, floated by reporting rather than stated by the production. There is a character named Agam, voiced by Sakina Jaffrey. There is a character named Damon, voiced by Darren Barnett. And there's a character named Z, voiced by Diane Doan. For all four of these, Karthik, Agam, Damon, and Z, we know the name and the voice, and we do not officially know whether they are allies, enemies, mentors, or something in between. So if you see confident character breakdowns declaring who is the villain and who is the love interest and who betrays whom, treat those as guesses. The production has given us a cast list, not a map of loyalties. Part of the fun, honestly, is that these names are currently blank slates, and any one of them could turn out to be the person who hunts Pavi or the person who saves her. What the cast list as a whole tells me, more than any individual role, is the scale the series is aiming for. A core trio, twin sisters and an airbending mentor, 2 animal companions, and at least 4 additional named characters with their own actors is the ensemble of a proper, serialized story, not a small chamber piece. It is the size of cast you build when you are planning arcs, alliances that shift, betrayals, reunions, the whole machinery of a 2-book, 26-episode saga. And every one of these characters is stepping into a world where the ground rules of the franchise have been inverted, where the Avatar is the enemy and the old nations are gone and the spirits are something to fear. Watching how each of them relates to a hunted Avatar, whether they stand with her or against her, is going to be a lot of the drama. But all of these people are living inside a place we have barely seen, the Seven Havens themselves. So let me talk about the setting, about what these strongholds are and what we can and cannot say about the world outside their walls. The Seven Havens give the show its name, and the confirmed description of them is evocative, even though it is sparse. They are the last strongholds of civilization, the central pillars of what remains, fortified safe zones spread across a world that has otherwise become unlivable. 7 places where people still cluster and survive. Everything else, by implication, is wilderness, ruin, danger. That is a striking geography for this franchise because Avatar has always been a story of a whole populated world, of 4 vast nations with cities and villages and countryside stretching between them. A world you could travel across, which the earlier shows literally did, episode after episode, town to town. Seven Havens shrinks that down to 7 points of light in a great darkness. It is the difference between a map full of places and a map with 7 marks and nothing safe in between. The most important thing to get right about the Havens, and the thing I have seen people fumble, is that they are not the 4 nations wearing new names. This is a plainly new post-Cataclysm geography. The 4 nations, the Water Tribes, the Earth Kingdom, the Fire Nation, and the Air Nomads were the old order, the world as it existed through both previous series. In Seven Havens, that order is gone. The Cataclysm did not just damage the 4 nations, it ended them as the structure of the world, and what replaced them is these 7 fortified havens, which do not map cleanly onto the old borders. So do not think of the 7 havens as, say, the Fire Nation renamed, or the Earth Kingdom broken into pieces. Think of them as something new that grew up in the wreckage after the world the four nations made came apart. How exactly the old cultures relate to the new havens, whether the people inside them still identify as water or earth or fire, whether the old traditions survived at all, is not something the series has spelled out. There is speculation that the element cultures and even the White Lotus persist inside the havens in some form, and that is a reasonable guess, but it is a guess, not a confirmed fact. We also do not know the names of the individual havens, or what distinguishes one from another, or where they sit relative to the old map. We know there are 7. We know Pavi comes from a city called Elora, and we do not officially know whether Elora is one of the 7 havens or simply a city within the world. The show has kept the internal geography of its own setting almost entirely hidden. That is a lot of deliberate blankness, and I think it is deliberate precisely because the shape of the world is part of the mystery. If the havens are the last safe places, then how they came to be, who built them, who rules them, and how they keep the wilds out are all questions the series can unspool at its own pace. A world map given away in a trailer is a world with no secrets left. They have chosen to give us 7 marks and let us wonder about the rest. What we can say about the world outside the havens comes mostly from the teaser, and it is bleak. The reporting describes a desolate, ruined, post-apocalyptic landscape, energy storms, the elements themselves in turmoil, land that has become uninhabitable. Some outlets even reach for the word cyberpunk to describe the tone, suggesting a texture that is not the pastoral, pre-industrial fantasy of the first series or even the 1920s modernity of Korra, but something harsher and stranger. I would hold that cyberpunk framing loosely because it comes from a few seconds of teaser and a writer reaching for a comparison, but the broad picture of a broken, storm-racked, elementally unstable world seems consistent across the coverage. Whatever the cataclysm was, it did not simply knock down buildings. It seems to have wounded the elements themselves, thrown the natural balance of the world into chaos, which fits a story where the cause is bound up with the collision of the spirit and physical worlds. When the boundary between worlds fails, you would expect exactly this, a physical world where the rules have started to bleed and warp. And this is where the visual choice I mentioned at the very beginning comes back around, because it suddenly makes complete sense. They handed this world to a French studio steeped in the aesthetic of Moebius, an artist whose whole signature was vast, strange, desolate landscapes that dwarf the tiny human figures moving through them. If the entire world outside the havens is a wilderness of storms and ruins and warped elements, you want an art style built for enormous, lonely, alien vistas. You want a look that can make 7 small strongholds feel like the last candles in a very large dark room. The Moebius influence is not decoration. It is the series choosing a visual language that matches its geography, a broken world rendered by the tradition best suited to painting broken worlds. I keep being struck by how many of the production choices, the French studio, the Moebius influence, the isolation of the avatar, the shrunken map, all point in the same direction, toward loneliness and scale, and a world that has become mostly empty. This is a story about a handful of survivors in a great ruin, and everything about how it is being made is tuned to make you feel the size of the ruin. But the ruin has a cause, and even though the creators are guarding that cause carefully, it is worth gathering everything we actually know and everything we are only guessing about the cataclysm itself, because it is the whole at the center of the whole story. Let me lay out the cataclysm as cleanly as I can, dividing the confirmed from the guessed, because this is the exact place where the internet is going to fill up with confident wrong answers. What is confirmed is small. There was a cataclysm, a devastating apocalyptic event, and it shattered the world, ended the 4 nations, and left civilization surviving only in the 7 havens. That is the fact. The world is broken, and there was an event that broke it. That is clearly all the series has officially told us about the nature of the disaster. It has not named it, dated it, or explained its cause. Everything beyond that is interpretation or speculation, and I want to walk through the main readings while keeping them clearly labeled. The leading interpretation, the one nearly every outlet reaches for, connects the cataclysm to the collision or catastrophic merging of the spirit world and the physical world. And the reason that reading is so popular is the thing I already walked you through, the open spirit portals Korra left at the end of her story. The wall between worlds that she took down after 10,000 years. I am not going to re-explain that decision, you have it. But the logic is simple. If the disaster involves the two worlds crashing into each other and the Avatar is the one who opened the door between them, then the door is the obvious suspect. That is a strong, coherent read, and I think it is probably close to the truth. But I have to keep saying probably because the creators have not confirmed it. They have shown us a broken world and let us do the arithmetic, and the arithmetic points at the portals, but pointing is not proving. Then there are the other candidate explanations, all of them speculation and worth naming just so you recognize them for what they are when you see them stated as fact. Some suggest a malevolent spirit, some great dark entity that came through into the human world and wrought the destruction, which would rhyme with Vaatu and the whole light and dark mythology at the franchise's core. Some suggest a natural disaster, something less intentional, the elements themselves tearing loose. Some frame it purely as the delayed consequence of the open portals, a slow spiritual poisoning of the world rather than a single catastrophic moment. And some combine these, a spirit exploiting the open doors, a disaster triggered by the merging. Each of these has its adherents, and each of them fits a few seconds of teaser and a paragraph of logline. None of them is confirmed. When you hear someone declare with total certainty that the cataclysm was caused by a specific named spirit or a specific event, understand that they are choosing one of several open possibilities and presenting it as settled. The honest position, the only honest position right now, is that we do not know what the cataclysm was. We know only that it happened. And here is the angle on the cataclysm that I find most interesting, the one that goes beyond just cataloging theories, because I think the mystery of the cataclysm is not really a mystery about physics or spirits. It is a mystery about blame. Notice how the confirmed facts are arranged. The world was destroyed. Nobody apparently fully knows or agrees on how. And the world has settled on an answer anyway. The Avatar did it. That is what grief does. That is what frightened people do in the wreckage of something too large to understand. They find the mightiest, most visible figure connected to the catastrophe, and they make that figure the cause. Because a world with a villain is easier to survive than a world where the disaster was senseless, or collective, or nobody's fault. The Avatar is the perfect scapegoat, precisely because it is the one soul connected to the spirit world that everyone now fears. The lone figure whose power is on the scale of world-ending events. Whether or not Korra actually caused the cataclysm, a broken world would need her to have caused it, would reach for that story almost automatically. So the deepest question of the series may not be what broke the world, but why the world is so sure it knows. That reframing is why the earlier speculation, the idea that the blame on the Avatar might be false or distorted, feels so load-bearing to me. If the cataclysm's true cause turns out to be something other than the Avatar, or something more complicated than a single person's choice, then the story of Seven Havens becomes a story about a girl inheriting the punishment for a crime that was never properly understood, hunted for an event that a frightened world simplified into a name to hate. And that would be a very Avatar kind of story, honestly, because this franchise has always been most interested in the gap between how the world sees a person and who that person actually is. It did it with Zuko, hunted and scarred and cast as a villain who was really a boy trying to find his way home. It did it with Korra herself, resented and doubted through her whole series. Now it may do it on the largest possible scale, with an entire ruined civilization wrong about the one soul it blames for its ruin. The cataclysm, in other words, might be less a puzzle to solve than a lie to unravel. We will not know until the show tells us. But the shape of what it is withholding and the way it is withholding it tells you the cataclysm is not just backstory. It is the central wound the whole series exists to examine. Now let me pull back from the story itself and spend some time on how this thing is actually being built, because the production of Seven Havens is a story in its own right, and some of the choices behind the camera tell you as much about the show's ambitions as anything in the trailer. Start with the two names at the top, because their return is not a small thing. And to understand why, you have to know a little about the years they spent away. Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko created Avatar together, saw it through The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, and then, for a stretch, watched the franchise move without them. The most documented example of that is the Netflix live-action adaptation. The two of them were originally attached to it as executive producers and were developing it. And in the middle of 2020, after around 2 years of work, they left the production. They said in separate public statements that they had come to believe their creative vision for the show was not being supported. DiMartino wrote that he realized he could not control the creative direction of the series and that whatever ended up on screen would not be what the two of them had envisioned or intended to make. Konietzko wrote that there had been no follow-through on the promise to support the creator's vision. Netflix, for its part, responded with respect and admiration and said it remained confident in its team. The live-action series was made without them and eventually aired. I bring that up not to relegate it, but because it frames what Avatar Studios and Seven Havens actually represent for these two men. They walked away from a version of their own creation because they could not steer it. And then they were handed a studio built specifically so that they could steer, installed as its chief creative officers, with the mandate to expand the world on their own terms. Seven Havens is the first series produced under that arrangement, the first big animated Avatar story in over a decade that DiMartino and Konietzko are shaping from the inside rather than watching from the outside. When you know they left one adaptation because they lost the wheel, the fact that they are firmly holding the wheel here reads as the whole point. This is the version they control. Whatever Seven Havens turns out to be, it will be theirs in a way the live-action series was not, and that alone makes it the truest new Avatar in years. The decision to make it in 2 dimensions, hand-drawn animation, is another statement, and in 2026 it is close to a defiant one. The industry has been drifting steadily toward computer-generated animation for both cost and spectacle reasons, and a lot of legacy franchises, when they return in glossy 3-dimensional renders. Avatar's own studio could easily have gone that way. Instead, Seven Havens is being made as a traditional 2-dimensional series, the same fundamental medium as the shows that came before it, which preserves the hand-drawn, painterly quality that was always central to how these stories felt. The choice to keep it 2-dimensional is a choice about identity, a refusal to let the franchise be modernized into something slicker and less itself. And pairing that traditional medium with the specific French studio and the specific artistic influences behind the look means they are not just preserving the old style, they are pushing the 2-dimensional form somewhere new, which is a more interesting move than either a straight nostalgia copy or a jump to computer animation would have been. The return of Jeremy Zuckerman as composer belongs in the same category of quiet, deliberate continuity. Music is doing enormous work in how these shows land emotionally, and the particular sound Zuckerman built, that blend of instruments and traditions drawn from the same cultural sources the world itself is built from, is inseparable from how the earlier series feel in the body. Interestingly, he has said this new score is very different, built on a more synthesis-driven palette rather than the old acoustic one, so this will not simply be the earlier music again. What comes back with him is the sensibility underneath the instruments, the sense of heart and restraint and cultural respect, and I suspect that is the part that will make your ear recognize it as Avatar even when the surface sounds new. You could reinvent everything else, and if the feeling in the music is Zuckerman's, some deep part of you would still know where you were. That is a continuity you cannot fake with visual references. It lives in the score. And then there is the shape of the order itself, 2 books of 13 episodes each, 26 episodes total, which I keep coming back to because it tells you something about intent. This is not an open-ended series designed to run indefinitely as long as it performs. It is a defined, bounded story, roughly the length of a single book of the original series stretched across 2 seasons, with what appears to be a planned beginning, middle, and end. In an age of series that sprawl until they are canceled mid-arc, a continuation that announces itself as 26 episodes and done, or at least 26 episodes as a complete statement, is telling you the creators have a specific story to tell and a specific length to tell it in. That is how you get an ending that means something. The original series worked in part because it was built as a finite journey with a destination. Seven Havens appears to be built the same way, and after so many franchises that lose themselves in endless continuation, I find the discipline of a planned, bounded story truly reassuring. The last production fact worth sitting with is where all of this is landing, because it says something about the whole strategy. Seven Havens is going to Paramount Plus, a streaming service, rather than to Nickelodeon's cable channel or to cinemas. And it is not alone in that. The other major new Avatar project, the animated Aang film, is also going to Paramount Plus rather than getting a wide theatrical release. So both of the big new pieces of this franchise are being routed to streaming. That is a deliberate corporate choice about where the audience for Avatar now lives, and how the company wants to reach them, and it is worth stating plainly and neutrally as a fact of the modern landscape rather than reading dark motives into it. The generation that fell in love with these shows largely did so through streaming in the first place. Meeting them there is a coherent bet. It does mean the future of Avatar is a streaming future, tied to a subscription, which is simply the shape of the industry now. I will admit I have mixed feelings about that because some part of me still wants a world drawn this beautifully to live on the biggest screen there is in a dark room full of strangers. But I understand the arithmetic, and a series has always been more of a living room thing than a cinema thing, so I make my peace with it. Which brings me to that other project I keep mentioning, the Aang film. Because Seven Havens does not exist in isolation. It is one piece of a larger plan that Avatar Studios is rolling out, and to see Seven Havens clearly, you have to see the whole board it sits on. The first thing Avatar Studios actually released was not Seven Havens at all. It was a film, an animated feature called Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender, sometimes styled with the phrasing The Legend of Aang, The Last Airbender, and it premiered on Paramount Plus on July 25th of 2026, which as I record this was only a couple of days ago, alongside a limited theatrical run in New York and Los Angeles to qualify it for awards. So this is all happening at once, in a rush of Avatar all through this single summer. The film dropped days ago, the Seven Havens teaser landed at Comic-Con days ago, and the series itself is coming in October. Avatar Studios is not tiptoeing back into the world. It is arriving all at once. The film is worth understanding because it tells you what kind of company is making Seven Havens and how it thinks about the timeline of its own universe. Avatar Aang follows an older Aang, the same boy from the original series, but grown into an adult, moving through a later chapter of his life. It reaches into the gap between the two television series, the decades of Aang's adulthood that the shows only ever gestured at, and gives them a story. And it is stacked with a serious voice cast. Aang is voiced by Eric Nam. The cast includes Dave Bautista and Stephen Yeun as Zuko, and Roman Zaragoza as Sokka, and Jessica Matten as Katara, and Dion Kwan as Toph, with D. Bradley Baker once again as Appa. That is a substantial, high-profile ensemble for what is fundamentally a return to the original characters at a later stage of their lives. Now here's the crucial thing to understand about how the film and the series relate, because it is easy to get tangled. Avatar Aang, the film, and Avatar Seven Havens, the series, are set in completely different parts of the timeline, and they are not telling one continuous story. The film goes backward into Aang's adult years, the era between the two original shows. Seven Havens goes forward past Korra into the broken future. So they are bookends of a kind, one reaching into the beloved past of the franchise, the other reaching into an unknown future, released within months of each other. If you are new to all this, do not expect the film's story to flow directly into the series. They are two different windows into the same vast history, opened at the same time by the same studio, but looking in opposite directions. The film is nostalgia and deepening, more time with the characters you already love. The series is expansion and risk, a leap into somewhere the franchise has never been. That contrast, I think, is the real strategy on display, and it is a smart one. Avatar Studios came back with one project designed to reassure and one designed to challenge. The film gives longtime fans exactly what they have wanted for years. More of Aang, more of the original team, the familiar faces at a new stage of life, made with the polish and the star power of a feature. The series takes those same fans somewhere uncomfortable and new, a hated avatar in a ruined world with a severed past. Releasing both in the same window is a way of saying, we can still give you the thing you loved, and we are also brave enough to give you something you have never seen. A studio that only made the film would be a nostalgia factory. A studio that only made the series would be gambling everything on a hard sell. Doing both at once is how you honor the past and still move forward, and it makes Seven Havens the more daring half of a deliberately balanced pair. So when you place Seven Havens on the board, this is where it sits. It is the second thing Avatar Studios has released and the first series it has made, It follows a film that just arrived and that looks backward into Aang's life. It is the forward-looking, risk-taking half of the studio's opening statement, and it is landing on the same streaming service as part of the same coordinated push from the same creators who built a whole company to get their world back under their own control. That context does not tell us anything more about the plot, but it tells us the series is not a one-off experiment thrown at the wall. It is a cornerstone, the piece that is supposed to define where the franchise goes from here. The film honors where Avatar has been. Seven Havens is the bet on where it is going. And that makes the questions it raises about the Avatar as villain, about the fear that has replaced reverence, worth taking seriously as the direction of the whole franchise, not just the premise of one show. Which is why I want to spend some real time on that inversion, the Avatar as the hated one, because it is not quite as unprecedented as it first sounds. The world has turned against benders and against the Avatar before, and how it happened last time might be the best clue we have to how it happened this time. The clearest precedent is right there in the first book of the Legend of Korra, and it is a story it tells about resentment curdling into revolution. When Korra arrives in the great metropolis at the center of her series, she finds a city seething with a movement of people who cannot bend, who feel oppressed and endangered by those who can. They call themselves the Equalists, and their masked leader, a man known as Amon, preaches that bending is the root of all inequality and injustice in the world, that benders have always used their power to dominate everyone else. And Amon has a power that terrifies the entire bending world. He can take a person's bending away, permanently, strip them of the ability they were born with, which for a bender is a kind of spiritual amputation, the loss of a core part of who they are. He builds a genuine mass movement on that fear and that grievance, and for a stretch of that season, the Avatar herself is on the back foot, hunted, outmatched, the symbol of exactly the bender establishment the movement wants to tear down. What makes Amon such a useful precedent is what he actually was underneath the mask, because the series pulls the rug out. His power to remove bending was not a gift from the spirits, as he claimed. It was blood bending, one of the darkest sub-skills in the whole franchise. The ability to seize control of the water inside a living body and move a person like a puppet. And I want to correct a common oversimplification here because it matters for understanding how rare and frightening this was. People often say bloodbending only works under the full moon, and in the original series, with the waterbender who invented it, that was true. It required the full moon's pull to manage. But Korra's series revealed a small number of people, Amon among them, along with his father and his brother, who could bloodbend at any time, with no full moon at all, because of a rare inborn gift. So Amon was not a spiritual savior freeing the world from benders. He was one of the deadliest benders alive, using a forbidden power in secret while publicly leading a crusade against bending. The man who taught the world to fear and hate benders was, himself, the very thing he taught them to fear, hiding it behind a mask and a message. Take in what that story is actually saying, because it maps onto Seven Havens with unsettling precision. It is a story about how a population, frightened and aggrieved, can be turned against benders and against the Avatar. It is a story where the narrative everyone believes, benders are the enemy, is built on a lie, or at least on something far more complicated than the crowd understands. And it is a story where the truth of who caused the fear is hidden behind a mask. Now look again at Seven Havens. A whole world turned against the Avatar, a narrative of blame that outlets suggest may be false or distorted, a mystery about what really happened underneath the story everyone accepts. The franchise has run this play before on the scale of a single city, and it may be running it now on the scale of the entire world. The Equalist Revolution was a rehearsal. The hatred of the Avatar in Seven Havens might be the full performance. There is an even older layer to this too, because the truth is the Avatar was never universally, simply beloved, and I think we sometimes remember the earlier shows as gentler on this point than they were. Aang spent his series ending a 100-year war started and waged by a nation that saw the Avatar as an obstacle to be eliminated, a nation whose entire founding act was the genocide of the Avatar's own people, the air nomads. Korra spent her series being resented, doubted, second-guessed, protested against, and physically hunted. Not by one villain, but across 4 seasons of a world that kept questioning whether it wanted an avatar at all. The idea that the avatar is a beloved protector was always partly a story the avatar told about themselves, and the world kept complicating it. So when Seven Havens makes the avatar the figure a whole world hates, it is not betraying the franchise's history. It is following it to its logical extreme. It is taking the doubt and resentment that always shadowed the avatar and letting it grow until it swallows the reverence entirely. And this is the part that I keep turning over, because it changes how I read the whole premise. If the avatar has always been feared as well as loved, always resented as well as needed, then a world that fears the avatar completely is not a broken version of the franchise. It is the franchise looking honestly at the shadow it always cast. The people making Seven Havens grew up telling stories about a figure the world could not decide whether to worship or destroy. Now they are telling a story about the moment the world finally decided to destroy. That is not a random dark turn for shock value. It is the mask coming off the franchise's own gentlest assumption. The way Amon's mask came off, revealing that the thing underneath was always more complicated than the comforting version. Which raises the question of who exactly is doing the hunting, because the logline is very specific that it is not only frightened humans coming after the new avatar. She is hunted by spirits too, and the spirit side of this world is its own strange, unsettled territory that deserves its own look. Spirits in this universe are not ghosts and they are not gods exactly. They are beings native to the spirit world, an actual place that exists alongside the physical one, populated by entities that range from small and gentle to vast and ancient and terrifying. Some are guardians of particular places or forces of nature given form. Some are playful, some are wise, some are wrathful. And crucially, spirits can be corrupted. When a spirit is filled with anger or darkness, or when the spiritual balance of a region is disturbed, spirits can turn, becoming dark spirits, twisted and aggressive versions of themselves. Korra's series showed this repeatedly, spirits going dark and lashing out, needing to be calmed or purified rather than simply fought. The light and dark that Rava and Vatu embody at the cosmic scale runs all the way down through the spirit world, so that any individual spirit can tip from one to the other depending on the state of the world around it. For most of history, all of that was kept at a distance because the spirit world and the human world were separated, walled off exactly as I described the first avatar arranging. Ordinary people did not deal with spirits. Spirits were the stuff of legend and the occasional crisis, not neighbors. And then Korra took that wall down. She left the portals open, and spirits returned to live in the human world. In her own era, that was largely portrayed as a healing, spirits and humans learning, awkwardly, to share a world again. But hold that against the state of things in Seven Havens. The world is shattered, the elements are in turmoil, the spiritual balance, whatever it now is, has clearly been thrown into chaos by the Cataclysm. And into that chaos, the confirmed logline tells us, the Avatar is hunted by spirits as well as humans. That is a dark inversion of Korra's hopeful ending. The open door that was supposed to reunite the worlds has by the time of Seven Havens apparently filled the human world with spirits that want the Avatar dead. Why would spirits hunt the Avatar? We have not been told, so what follows is interpretation, and I will hold it as such. But there are a few readings that make sense from the established lore. One is that the Cataclysm corrupted the spirit world, turned a great many spirits dark, and that these darkened spirits, like any dark spirit, lash out at the world and at the figure most connected to spiritual power, the Avatar. Another is that the spirits blame the Avatar for the same reason the humans do, that if the catastrophe came from the collision of the two worlds, then the spirits suffered it too, their world torn as badly as ours, and they hold the Avatar responsible for the ruin of both worlds. A third, darker possibility is that something specific and malevolent came through the open portals, some great dark spirit in the tradition of Vatu, and that it and its lesser spirits are hunting the Avatar because the Avatar is the one being capable of standing against it. All three fit the pieces, none is confirmed, but every one of them turns the Avatar's isolation up another notch, because it means Pavi is not just hated by the surviving humans. She is hated on both sides of a boundary that no longer properly exists, with nowhere in either world that is safe. That, to me, is the quiet horror of the confirmed premise. and it is worth naming plainly. Every previous avatar, however hunted, however doubted, had a side. Aang had his friends and eventually the free nations. Korra had allies even at her lowest. The avatar is by definition the bridge between the mortal world and the spirit world, the one who belongs to both. Seven Havens takes that defining belonging and turns it into a defining exile. Pavi belongs to both worlds, and both worlds want her gone. The human survivors hunt her as the destroyer. The spirits hunt her across a boundary that Korra dissolved. The bridge is being attacked from both banks of the river she is supposed to span. I cannot think of a lonelier position to put an avatar in, and it is not a theory, it is the plain reading of the confirmed logline. Hunted by enemies both human and spirit. 6 words, and they describe a total exile. And there is a grim elegance to how the spirit threat closes the loop on the whole mythology, whether or not the series intends it. The first avatar built a wall to keep the spirit world's chaos out of the human world, and spent his long life failing to bring lasting peace despite it. The most recent avatar tore that wall down in the name of peace and connection. And the next avatar may inherit a world where the absence of the wall has let the chaos flood in exactly as the first avatar feared, with dark spirits roaming a broken land and hunting his distant successor. If that is where this goes, then Seven Havens is not just a new story, it is the closing argument in a 10,000-year debate about whether the worlds should ever have been reconnected, argued not in words but in the ruin of everything. That is a heavy thing for a show to be about, and again, I am reading ahead of what is confirmed. But the spirit hunters in that logline are not a throwaway detail. They are the sign that the Cataclysm was spiritual as much as physical, that the wound runs through both worlds, and that the new avatar is caught in the middle of it with no ground to stand on. Which naturally raises the question of what she can actually do about any of it, what powers she has, what an earthbending avatar in this particular world might be capable of. And here I have to be careful, because talking about what a character could do is one of the easiest places to drift from fact into invention. Let me start with what is really established by the rules of the world, and then be very disciplined about the line where established rules end and speculation begins. As the avatar, Pavi is in principle capable of learning to bend all 4 elements. That is the definitional power of the avatar, the one thing that makes the avatar the avatar. Her native element, the one she was born bending, is earth. The other 3, water, fire, and air, are, by the rules, learnable for her in a way they are not for anyone else in the world. She also has access, in principle, to the avatar state, that heightened mode where the avatar draws on tremendous power. Those are not predictions, they are the baseline mechanics of what an avatar is. So far, so solid. But here's where I want to pump the brakes, because the specifics of what Pavi will actually be able to do are not the same as what an avatar can theoretically do, and the series has given her a starting position that complicates the usual assumptions. Remember the severed connection to the past lives. Every previous avatar learning the elements had, in the background, the accumulated spiritual weight of thousands of predecessors, and access to the avatar state was tied up with that connection. Korra's own journey with the avatar state was made vastly harder by the damage to that link. Pavi begins with the link already severed, reaching only as far back as Korra. So while the rules say an avatar can do all these things, this avatar starts from a place of unusual spiritual isolation. And it is entirely fair to expect that her path to mastering the elements and the avatar state will be harder and stranger than her predecessors. Not a given. What she can do in principle and what she can do in practice in a broken world with a broken connection may be 2 very different things. The show has not shown us her fighting, has not shown us her range, has not confirmed which elements she has learned, or whether she can enter the avatar state at all. So anyone telling you how powerful Pavi is right now is guessing. The sub-skills are where I have to be most careful, because this is the sort of thing that gets stated as fact when it is really just fanish hope. Earthbending, over the history of the franchise, has branched into some remarkable specialized forms. There is metal bending, the ability to bend the trace impurities within processed metal, which opened up a whole new domain of the art. There is lava bending, the bending of molten rock, which a small number of exceptionally powerful earthbenders have shown. There is sand bending in the seismic sense that lets some earthbenders perceive the world through vibrations in the ground. These are all real, established parts of the earthbending tradition. But, and this is the crucial but, none of them are automatic. Being an earthbender, even being the avatar, does not mean you can do all of these things. They are rare, hard-won specializations that most earthbenders never achieve. So when you imagine Pavi metal bending or lava bending, understand that you are imagining, not reporting. The show has not told us which, if any, of these sub-skills she has. She might have none of them. She might develop some over the series. We do not know. I especially want to get metal bending right, because it is the best known of these sub-skills. And it comes with a piece of history that this very channel has gotten wrong before, so let me set it down correctly. Metal bending was invented by Toph, the blind earthbending prodigy from the original series, and the circumstances of that invention matter. She did not discover it casually, she figured it out while she was imprisoned, locked inside a metal cage by earthbending bounty hunters, two men named Xin Fu and Master Yu, who had been hired by her own father, Lao Beifong, to capture her and bring her home. Trapped in that metal box, cut off from the earth she was used to sensing, she found the tiny particles of earth still present within the metal and learned to bend those, breaking herself free. It was an act of desperate ingenuity under captivity, not a trick she picked up in passing. I lay that out precisely because the temptation, when you talk about a new earthbending avatar, is to gesture at metal bending as though it were a standard tool in the earthbender's kit that Pavi will simply have. It is not. It was one person's breakthrough born in a cage, and whether Pavi ever learns it is completely unknown. What I think is fair to say, and I will keep it clearly at the level of interpretation, is that the series has set up an interesting tension between how powerful an avatar is supposed to be and how powerless Pavi's starting position seems. The avatar is, by definition, the pinnacle of capability, and Pavi begins hunted, hated, physically navigating the world on a carved prosthetic, spiritually cut off from all but one predecessor, in a world so broken that the elements themselves are in turmoil. The gap between the theoretical power of her role and the practical difficulty of her situation is enormous, and I suspect the story lives in that gap, in the distance between what an avatar should be able to do and what this particular avatar in this particular ruin actually can. That is a guess about the show's emphasis, not a claim about her power set. But it is the kind of gap the franchise has always been drawn to. Aang was the mightiest being alive and a frightened 12-year-old who did not want the job. Pavi may be the most powerful being in the world and a hunted girl who can barely survive the week. The power was never really the point. What they do with it and what it costs them always was. With all of that laid out, the confirmed and the interpreted and the frankly speculative, I think it is worth stopping and sorting the whole picture cleanly, separating what we truly know from what we are only telling ourselves, because a show this shrouded generates an enormous amount of confident noise, and it helps to have a clear map of the difference. Before I sort the picture, though, I want to talk about the leaks, because the story of how information about this show reached us is itself a little lesson in how to weigh everything else. Cast your mind back to late 2024, months before any official word. Descriptions of the project started leaking online, and those leaks got the central premise startlingly right. Twin sisters, both earthbenders, one of them the new avatar. When the official announcement came in early 2025 and when the teaser followed, that core held up almost perfectly, so the leaks were real, and they were accurate about the biggest structural facts. That is worth acknowledging honestly, because it would be easy for me to tell you to dismiss everything that is not an official statement, and the leaks prove that would be too simple. Sometimes the people passing information along honestly know something. But look closer at those same leaks, because tangled up with the accurate core were details that have not been confirmed and may not be true, and that mixture is exactly the trap. The leaks floated an age describing the twins as around 9 years old. Now that number has taken on a life of its own, repeated across countless posts and videos as though it were established fact. It is not. It came from a leak, and the on-screen ages of Pavi and Nisha have not been confirmed by anything official. It might be right. Leaks sometimes are. But notice how a single unverified number riding along inside an otherwise accurate leak gets promoted to certainty simply by being repeated. The accurate parts of the leak lend their credibility to the unverified parts, and before long the whole package is treated as gospel. That is the mechanism by which a fandom talks itself into things that were never confirmed, and it is worth watching yourself do it. So here's the discipline I try to hold, and I would gently suggest it to you too because it makes the whole experience of following a show like this more honest and oddly more fun. A source being right about one thing does not make it right about everything. A detail being repeated 1,000 times does not make it confirmed. And a story being plausible, even beautiful, even exactly what you would write yourself, does not make it true. The twin premise was leaked and confirmed. The 9-year-old age was leaked and not confirmed. Those two facts came from the same source in the same breath, and only one of them has been verified. Holding them apart, refusing to let the confirmed lend its authority to the unconfirmed, is the whole game. It is also, honestly, a kinder way to watch a show unfold, because it leaves room for the story to surprise you instead of grading it against a version you already decided was canon. The other thing the leaks teach is patience with the gaps. When a fandom is starved of information, it does not tolerate blank spaces, it fills them with theories, with leaked half-facts, with confident reconstructions of backstory that the series has not written yet. And the danger is that by the time the real thing arrives, people have grown so attached to the version they built in the vacuum that the actual show feels wrong to them, feels like a betrayal of a story that was never real in the first place. I have watched it happen to other franchises, fans preferring their own pre-release fan canon to the thing the creators actually made. Avatar has an especially passionate, especially online fandom, and the long, patient rollout, the years of near silence, has left an enormous vacuum for exactly that kind of fan canon to grow in. So part of my hope, watching all this, is that people hold their theories loosely enough that the real Seven Havens gets to be itself when it arrives, rather than being measured against 2 years of imagined episodes. With that spirit in mind, let me actually do the sorting cleanly, one tier at a time, so you walk away knowing exactly which shelf each piece of this belongs on. On the top shelf, the confirmed things, the facts you can repeat without hedging. Avatar, Seven Havens is real. It is the 3rd animated series, a sequel to both earlier shows, from DiMartino and Konietzko under Avatar Studios, premiering on Paramount Plus on October 9th of 2026. 2 books, 13 episodes each. 2-dimensional animation from the French studio, with Jeremy Zuckerman returning to compose. The world has been shattered by a cataclysm, and civilization survives in 7 fortified havens. The new avatar is Pavi, an earthbender from the city of Allura, an amputee with a wooden prosthetic voiced by Saheli Khan. She has a long-lost twin sister named Nisha, also an earthbender voiced by Aishu Devon. Her mentor and friend is an airbender named Jay. There are cat monkeys named Geet and Ruhi, voiced by D. Bradley Baker. The Avatar is feared as a destroyer rather than revered, and is hunted by human and spirit enemies. The teaser shows Korra in the Avatar state amid ruin. Those things you can say plainly. They are the shape of what we know. On the middle shelf, the probable things, the strong interpretations that are not confirmed but rest on solid ground. That the Cataclysm is connected to Korra, leaving the spirit portals open and the resulting collision of the human and spirit worlds. That Korra has died, which follows with near certainty from the rule that only one avatar lives at a time, even though the manner of her death is unknown. That Pavi can only spiritually reach Korra and none of the earlier avatars, which follows from the severing of Korra's connection to her past lives. That the series is built partly around the question of what really happened to Korra, and whether the world blames her fairly. These are not wild guesses. They are conclusions drawn tightly from established canon and consistent reporting. But they are conclusions, not confirmations, and I have tried to flag them as such every time. And on the bottom shelf, the speculation, the pure theory, the things you should never repeat as fact no matter how many times you have heard them. That Nisha is also an avatar, or a dark avatar, or one half of a cosmic pair. That the twins are 9 years old, that they were separated at birth, one raised by the White Lotus and one on the streets. The specific story of how Pavi lost her leg, the precise manner and circumstances of Korra's death, the exact nature of the cataclysm and whether a specific named spirit caused it, whether Korra lost her avatar state, the alignments of Karthik, Agam, Damon, and Z, who is friend and who is foe. the names and identities of the individual havens, the claim that Korra was killed by the people she tried to save. All of that lives on the bottom shelf. Some of it will probably turn out to be true. Fans have guessed right before. But right now, every one of those is a story someone is telling, not a fact the series has confirmed. I find it actually clarifying to lay it out like that, 3 shelves, because it turns the anxiety of not knowing into something almost pleasurable. Look at how much sits on the bottom shelf. Look at how much of what people confidently argue about is, in truth, undecided. That is not a frustration, it is an invitation. Every item on that bottom shelf is a question the show still gets to answer, a surprise it has not spent yet, a place where it can still move you precisely because you do not already know the ending. A show you have completely spoiled cannot surprise you. Seven Havens, right now, is almost entirely unspoiled because the creators have been so disciplined about what they release. The vast blank space is not a lack. It is the whole reason the premiere can still land like a revelation. And the reason I labor this point, why I keep sorting and hedging and flagging rather than just telling you a thrilling, confident story, is that this channel would rather be honest than exciting. And honestly, the honesty is more exciting in the end. It would be easy to narrate you a gripping, detailed account of exactly how the world ended and exactly what happened to Korra, and exactly who Nisha really is. It would probably even be more satisfying to listen to in the moment drifting off. But most of it would be invented, and when the series arrived and contradicted it, that satisfaction would curdle into the small betrayal of having been told a made-up thing dressed as fact. I would rather hand you the real map, the 3 honest shelves, and let the series fill in the blanks itself. Which is exactly what it is about to start doing, because for all this careful uncertainty, there is a specific date when the blanks begin to fill, and it is worth thinking about what that first day of the show will and will not tell us. Before I get to that though, I want to spend a little time on something that runs underneath the whole project and that I think is easy to undersell, which is what the choices about who Pavi is say about where this franchise stands. I mentioned that she is an amputee, the first avatar with a permanent physical disability, and I do not want to let that pass as just a bit of trivia because it connects to something the franchise has believed from the very beginning. Avatar has always insisted that heroism and physical perfection are not the same thing, and it has insisted on it not with speeches but with characters. The greatest earthbender it ever created perceives the world without sight. A boy who cannot walk soars on the wind. These were not token gestures, they were central, beloved figures whose disabilities were inseparable from their strength. Making the newest avatar an amputee is the franchise saying, again and more boldly than ever, that supreme power does not have to look like the fantasy of an unbroken body, that the person who might save everyone can move through the world on a prosthetic, in a genre that still overwhelmingly reserves great power for the physically flawless. That is a quietly radical continuity, and it is one of the parts of this whole announcement I am most glad about. There is a deeper resonance to it too, given the world she lives in. Pavi is a broken world avatar, an incomplete embodied hero in a world that is itself shattered and incomplete. The franchise has placed a girl who is missing a part of herself at the center of a world that is missing most of itself, and while I am reading into it, the rhyme feels intentional. This is a story about survival among ruins, about carrying on when the whole has been broken into pieces, about wholeness being something you build rather than something you are handed. An avatar who has already lived through the loss of part of her own body, who has already learned to move and stand and fight without something most people take for granted, is almost the perfect protagonist for a world that has lost so much and has to keep going anyway. Her body carries the theme of the whole show. Again, that is interpretation. The creators have not framed it in those words. But I would be surprised if the resonance were an accident. The casting and the naming point at something as well, and I want to state it neutrally as a production observation rather than reading motives into it. The voice cast leans heavily on performers of South Asian heritage, and the character names Pavi, Nisha, Jay, Agam, Geet, Ruhi carry that texture too. The Avatar world has always been built by weaving together real human cultures, drawing its 4 nations and its visual and spiritual language from East Asian, South Asian, Inuit, and other sources with enormous care taken to honor rather than flatten them. Each series has leaned on that palette a little differently. The particular cultural center of gravity in Seven Havens, evident in the names and the casting, suggests the new world will foreground textures the earlier shows touched more lightly, which is a natural way for a franchise to keep its world feeling large and various rather than repeating itself. How exactly those textures will shape the societies of the Havens, we cannot yet say, since the series has not detailed how its post-Cataclysm cultures are organized. But the direction is there in the choices already made. What ties all of this together, the disabled avatar, the diverse cast, the careful cultural sourcing, is a philosophy about who gets to be at the center of an epic. And it is a philosophy the franchise has held with unusual consistency across 2 decades. Avatar has always believed that the hero of the story could be a girl, could be blind, could be in a wheelchair, could come from a culture that Western fantasy usually pushes to the margins or ignores entirely. And that none of that was a compromise or a statement bolted onto the story, but simply what a rich, honest world looks like. Seven Havens extends that belief into its next generation, and it does so at the highest possible level, the Avatar herself, the soul at the center of the entire mythology. There is something fitting about that. If the whole franchise has been arguing, softly, for 20 years, that power and worth do not belong only to the expected kind of hero, then placing an amputee girl of color at the very center of the reincarnation cycle is that argument reaching its natural summit. And it matters that they did it without fanfare, without turning it into the show's marketing hook, simply a fact of who she is. That restraint is its own kind of confidence. The show does not need to tell you it is being inclusive. It just builds a world where the person at its very center happens to be someone the old stories would have overlooked, and lets that be normal. That, more than any plot detail, tells me the people making this still understand what their franchise was always about. Now, to that date, and what the premiere will actually deliver, because October 9th is closer than it feels, and it is going to answer some questions while deliberately withholding others. Think about what a first season of a mystery-driven series like this actually does, because it helps to set expectations honestly. It almost certainly will not answer everything, and it would be a bad show if it did. The whole engine of Seven Havens, as it has been presented, is a set of questions. What broke the world? What happened to Korra? Where the twins came from? Why spirits hunt her too? Whether the blame is deserved? A story built on questions like those does not empty them all out in the opening episodes. It parcels them, answers a few, deepens the rest, and saves the largest for the end. With only 2 books to work with, the shape is probably that Book 1 raises and complicates the central mysteries while establishing the world and the characters, and Book 2 pays them off. So going in on October 9th, I would expect to leave the early episodes knowing Pavi, knowing the texture of the Havens, feeling the danger, and still not knowing the full truth of the Cataclysm. That is not the series being coy. That is how a 2-part mystery is supposed to breathe. What the premiere almost certainly will give us is the ground-level texture that no logline can. And honestly, that is the part I am most hungry for. We will find out what daily life in a haven actually looks and feels like, how these last strongholds function, what people fear, how they speak about the Avatar when they think no one dangerous is listening. We will meet Pavi as a person rather than a premise, learn how she moves through her world, how she carries her prosthetic and her isolation, what she wants before she ever learns what she is. We will get a sense of the relationship between the twins, the texture of Jay's mentorship, the personality of a couple of cat monkeys. The confirmed facts are a skeleton. The premiere is where the series puts flesh on it, and the flesh, the specific human warmth of it, is what will actually decide whether people fall in love with this the way they fell in love with the earlier shows. A grim premise executed with tenderness is Avatar's whole signature. A grim premise executed grimly is just grim. The first episodes are where we find out which one this is. There is even a small practical uncertainty about how we will get to watch it at all, which is worth mentioning honestly. As of now, it is not entirely clear whether the episodes will arrive all at once, the whole first book dropped in a single day to be watched in a night, or spread out week by week the way the original series aired. The reporting I have seen settles on the premiere date without nailing down the release pattern, so I will not pretend to know it. And it matters more than it might seem for a mystery-driven show, because the 2 models produce completely different experiences. A weekly release gives the theories a week to breathe between episodes, lets the fandom argue and speculate, and sit in the not knowing, which for a show built on withheld answers can be a real pleasure. A single drop turns it into one long plunge, the mysteries opened and closed in a rush. Neither is better exactly, but they shape how the story lands, and it is one more thing we do not yet firmly know. I mention it mostly as a reminder of how much is still sincerely open, right down to the rhythm of how we will experience it. There are a handful of specific questions I will personally be watching for, and I offer them less as predictions than as the things I would keep an ear open for as the show unfolds. The first is how it handles Korra. Does it treat her with tenderness, honor the character fans hold so dearly, and complicate the world's blame of her? Or does it use her simply as a dead symbol? The way Seven Havens treats Korra's memory will tell you a great deal about its whole moral posture. The second is how it handles the severed link to the deep past, whether it leans into that isolation as a source of drama or finds some way to restore the link. The third is the twin, whether Nisha turns out to be the ordinary sister the confirmed facts describe, or whether the series has a larger role in mind that it has kept hidden. And the fourth, the one I care about most, is whether the world's hatred of the Avatar is treated as a tragedy to be corrected or a truth to be reckoned with. Is Pavi hated wrongly, and the story is about clearing her name and the Avatar's? Or is there something the Avatar deeply did, some real weight of responsibility, that the story refuses to let off the hook? Those are the questions whose answers will define what kind of show this actually is, and none of them can be answered from a teaser. They can only be answered by watching. I also think it is worth setting a realistic expectation about the emotional register, because the premise is dark and it would be easy to brace for unrelenting bleakness. But everything I know about these creators suggests that is not how they work. The earlier shows went to plainly dark places, genocide, war, trauma, loss of self, and they never lost their warmth or their humor or their faith in people while doing it. The darkness in Avatar has always been in service of the light, a way of making the hope earned rather than assumed. So while Seven Havens has the bleakest premise the franchise has ever opened on, I would be surprised if it turns out to be a joyless show. I would expect it to be a show about finding warmth and connection and even humor in the ruins, about a hunted girl who is still, somehow, a girl, with a sister and a mentor and two ridiculous cat monkeys, and moments of lightness in the dark. If it is made by the people who made the originals, and it is, then The Ruin is probably the setting for a story about hope, not a story about despair. The premise is the darkness. The show, if it is true to its lineage, will be about the light people carry through it, and there is a real chance, I should say plainly, that it does not work. Continuations are hard. The bar these creators set with their earlier work is extraordinarily high. In a shattered world premise with a hated avatar and a severed past is a clearly risky bet that could tip into misery or incoherence if the execution falters. I am hopeful, but hope is not the same as certainty, and I would not want to send you off to sleep pretending this is guaranteed to be great. It is guaranteed to be ambitious. Whether the ambition lands is exactly what October 9th begins to reveal, and it is why, for once, a premiere date feels less like a marketing beat and more like the moment a long-held breath finally gets let out. Which brings me, in the end, to the larger thing all of this sits inside, the strange and specific place that Avatar occupies in the culture, and why a new chapter of it arriving carries a weight that most returning franchises simply do not. Here's the strange thing about Avatar, the thing that makes it different from almost any other animated property of its era. It got bigger after it ended. The original series finished in 2008, a well-loved show with a devoted following, and then, over the years that followed, something unusual happened. It did not fade the way most children's cartoons fade. It grew. A whole generation who were too young to catch it the first time discovered it on streaming, and an older generation rediscovered it, and around 2020, when much of the world was suddenly stuck at home with nothing to do but revisit things that comforted them, Avatar surged back into the cultural conversation with a force that truly surprised people. It became, more than a decade after it ended, among the most discussed shows on streaming, dissected and quoted and celebrated as though it were brand new. A cartoon that had been off the air for over 10 years was suddenly, improbably, everywhere again. Why did that happen when so many other shows of its generation stayed in the past? I think it is because Avatar was built more solidly than it needed to be. It was on paper a children's action cartoon, and it could have coasted on that. Instead, it committed to genuine serialized storytelling, real character arcs that paid off across dozens of episodes, moral questions it took seriously, a villain whose turn became one of the best-loved redemption arcs in all of animation, and an emotional honesty that did not condescend to its young audience. It treated children as capable of handling war and grief and moral complexity, and in doing so, it made something that those children could grow up and return to without embarrassment, that they could show their own kids, that rewarded rewatching at every age. It aged not just well, but upward, revealing more the older you got. That is a rare quality, and it is why the fandom did not dissolve. It deepened, generation over generation, until it was more beloved 15 years after it ended than it had been when it aired. That is the cultural weight that Seven Havens is stepping into, and it cuts both ways. On the one hand, there has never been a more receptive moment for a new Avatar. The audience is enormous, passionate, and primed, larger now than at any point in the franchise's history. A new series arrives to a built-in devotion that most shows can only dream of. On the other hand, that same devotion is a kind of pressure that could crush a lesser project. When people love something this deeply, when it has become part of how they understand their own childhoods and their own values, they do not greet a continuation casually. They greet it with hope and fear in equal measure, terrified that the new thing will somehow tarnish the old thing, that a misstep will reach backward and stain the memory they hold sacred. That is a heavy burden to hand a new show, and it is exactly the burden Seven Havens carries. It is not just competing with other shows. It is competing with a 15-year-old memory that has been polished by love into something close to perfect. And that, I think, is the real reason the careful, patient, controlled rollout matters so much. Why it is not just corporate caution, but something closer to respect. The people making Seven Havens know precisely what they are handling because many of them made the thing being handled. They know that a generation's childhood is riding on it. They know that the fandom will forgive a bold failure more readily than a cynical cash-in, and that the worst possible outcome is not a flawed show, but a soulless one. Everything about how they have approached this, the meaningful dates, the trusted voices, the years of near silence, the return of the original creators and composer, the willingness to take a really risky creative swing rather than play it safe, reads as an attempt to be worthy of that weight. Whether they succeed, none of us can know yet. But they are, at least, treating the responsibility as a responsibility, and after watching so many beloved things get handed to people who treated them as products, that alone moves me a little. There is one more layer to why this particular return carries such weight, and it is almost philosophical. Avatar, at its core, has always been a story about balance, about cycles, about the way the world breaks and heals and breaks again, about generations inheriting the consequences of the generations before them. A franchise about reincarnation and legacy and the long consequences of choices is, in a sense, uniquely suited to being continued across decades in the real world, because its own theme is exactly that, the passing of a burden from one life to the next, the way the present is shaped by acts committed long ago. When DiMartino and Konietzko return after 15 years to tell a story about a new Avatar inheriting a world broken by the choices of the last one, there is an accidental honesty to it. The creators themselves inheriting and reckoning with the world they built as younger people. The show is about legacy, and the making of the show is an act of legacy. That doubling is part of why a new Avatar feels less like a product launch and more like a genuine passage of time. A thing that has grown and aged alongside the people who love it. Which is finally the thought I want to leave you with. The reason all of this, the confirmed and the uncertain and the frankly unknowable, adds up to something worth caring about even before a single episode has aired. I keep returning in the end to Pavi herself and to what it must be to be her, because underneath all the lore and the production notes and the careful hedging, that is the human thing this show is really about. Imagine being a young girl in a broken world, doing your best to survive, and discovering that you are the Avatar. In any earlier era, that discovery, however frightening, would come wrapped in a kind of glory. You are the chosen one. You are the bridge, the balance, the one the world has waited for. Every avatar before Pavi got to feel, somewhere under the fear, that they were meant for something, that the title was a gift even when it was a burden. Pavi gets the opposite. She learns that she is the avatar, and the meaning of that word in her world is monster. Destroyer, the reason your parents lie dead and your world is ash. She discovers her identity, and her identity is the most hated thing alive. There is no glory in it, none, only danger and grief and the crushing weight of being blamed for an apocalypse she does not even remember causing. And here is the psychological cruelty that I think the series is set up to explore, whether or not it ultimately goes there. When the entire world tells you that you are a destroyer, how do you not start to believe it? That is the thing that gets me about her situation. It is one thing to be hunted by people who are wrong about you. It is another, far worse thing to be hunted by people who are wrong about you while you yourself do not know whether they are right. Pavi cannot fully remember her origins. She cannot consult the long line of past avatars who might reassure her of who she is meant to be, because that line is severed. The only predecessor she can reach is Korra, the very avatar the world blames. So when Pavi looks inward for an answer to the question, am I really the destroyer they say I am, she may find no comfort there. Only the face of the woman the world holds responsible. She is denied even the certainty of her own innocence. That is a profound kind of isolation, being unable to prove to yourself that you are not the villain of your own story. That, to me, is the deepest well the premise opens, and it is the part I most hope the show is brave enough to actually sit in rather than resolve too quickly. The franchise has always been interested in identity, in the gap between who you are and who the world insists you are, and in the harder gap between who you are and who you fear you might be. Zuko's whole arc was a boy trying to figure out whether he was the person his cruel father wanted him to be or someone better. Korra's whole arc was a woman stripped down again and again to the question of whether she was anything at all without the power that defined her. Pavi's arc, if it follows the pattern, will be the sharpest version yet. A girl who must decide whether to accept the world's verdict on her soul or to define herself against the entire weight of a civilization that wants her dead. Not, is the world right about me? But who am I going to be even if I cannot prove the world wrong? That is a question with no easy answer, and it is just the sort of question this franchise has always taken more seriously than any children's cartoon has any obligation to. And the twin sharpens it further because Nisha is, in a sense, the road not taken. Here is another girl, physically Pavi's mirror, born of the same origin, and yet the world does not hunt her because she is not the avatar. So Pavi has, standing right beside her, a living picture of who she might have been if the soul had landed a moment differently. The same face, the same blood, one of them cursed and one of them free, separated by nothing but the accident of which twin the avatar spirit chose. That is a haunting thing to put next to a hunted protagonist, a sister who shares everything except the curse. It could breed resentment or guilt or a fierce protectiveness or all three at once. It could make Pavi wonder why her, why not Nisha, what did she do to deserve the mark? The confirmed setup, one avatar and her ordinary twin, is subtly loaded with exactly this kind of ache, and it does not need a single fan theory to be devastating. Two girls with one face, and only one of them is allowed to be innocent. So when I strip away everything, the release dates, and the studios, and the voice cast, and the 3 shelves of certainty, what is left is this, and it is why I'm going to watch. Seven Havens is a story about a child who inherits the blame for the end of the world, who cannot remember whether she deserves it, who has lost part of her body and most of her spiritual lineage and the entire goodwill of every living person, and who has to decide, with almost nothing to stand on, that she is going to try to save them anyway. The people who want her dead. That is the Avatar's job stripped down to its unbearable core, protecting a world that hates you, and the franchise has never stated it that starkly before. If the series has the courage of its premise, it will be about the choice to be good in the total absence of gratitude, to help people who would kill you, to be the balance in a world that has decided you are the imbalance. There is no more Avatar idea than that. It has just never cost an Avatar this much to try. And that is what I will be thinking about, drifting off in the weeks before it airs, and probably for a long time after. There is one more stake buried in all of this that I have not named directly yet, And it is the largest one of all, large enough that I mean to separate cleanly what the canon establishes from what I'm only wondering aloud. The Avatar cycle, that unbroken chain of reincarnation stretching back 10,000 years, is not as invincible as it looks. It can, in fact, be ended. The canon established this in Korra's story, in the same dark chapter where her link to every earlier life was cut. When Vaatu tore Rava out of Korra and began to destroy her, the danger was not only that Korra would die, it was that if Rava, the light spirit living at the core of every avatar, were fully destroyed, the avatar would cease to exist entirely. No reincarnation, no next life. The cycle itself would end forever, and the world would be left with no avatar at all, ever again. Korra came honestly close to being the last avatar in that sense. Not the last of her generation, but the last, full stop. She saved the cycle by preserving a fragment of Rava and restoring her, but the show made the stakes unmistakable. The chain that seems eternal is one bad day away from being broken for good. Hold that established fact against everything we know about Seven Havens, and a cold question comes into focus. This is a world where the Avatar is hunted by humans who want her dead, and spirits who want her dead. This is a world where the previous Avatar's connection to the deep past is already severed, the chain already damaged. This is a world so hostile to the Avatar that killing the current one is, apparently, something a great many people actively want. And this is the thing that the ordinary viewer might not realize, that gives all of that a much darker edge. In this universe, killing the Avatar is an enormously dangerous act even for people who hate the Avatar because of how the reincarnation works. If the Avatar is killed while in the Avatar state, drawing on the full power of the cycle, the reincarnation can be broken. The cycle ended. That is canon established long ago. A world that wants the Avatar dead is, whether it understands it or not, a world flirting with the permanent end of the Avatar itself. Now I want to be disciplined because from here on I am speculating, and I will keep it clearly labeled. The show has not said that the cycle is in danger. It has not said that anyone is trying to end the Avatar permanently rather than just kill this particular one. But the pieces are arranged in a way that makes the possibility hang in the air. A hated Avatar, a damaged chain, a world full of enemies who want her gone, and a cataclysm that may already have wounded the spiritual order of the world. If you were a storyteller who wanted to raise the ultimate stakes for a 2-book saga, you would reach for exactly this. The possibility that this Avatar is not just fighting for her life, but for the survival of the Avatar as an idea, that if she falls, the 10,000-year light that Wan lit in the wilderness finally goes out. I am not telling you that is the plot. I am telling you the ingredients for that plot are all sitting on the table, in the confirmed canon and the confirmed premise, and it would be a very natural dish to cook from them. What makes that possibility resonant rather than just a bigger explosion is the thematic rhyme with everything the franchise has been about. The very first Avatar, Wan, spent his long life trying and failing to bring lasting peace, and died apologizing for it. The most recent Avatar, Korra, tried to heal the world by reconnecting the worlds, and if the leading reading is right, that healing is what curdled into catastrophe. Every Avatar, in a sense, has been fighting a losing battle against the world's tendency to fall back into imbalance. And now perhaps the story arrives at the moment where the losing battle might actually be lost, where the cycle that has absorbed 10,000 years of failure and kept going might finally reach the end of what it can absorb. There is something almost unbearably fitting about a franchise built on cycles and reincarnation, eventually asking whether the cycle can survive at all. It is the question the whole mythology has been gently building toward since Wan bonded with Rava in that wilderness. Whether Seven Havens is the story that asks it, none of us can say yet. But it is positioned more than any Avatar story before it to be exactly that. And if it is, then Pavi's choice to try to save a world that hates her takes on an even heavier meaning, because she would be trying to save not just those ungrateful people, but the very possibility of the Avatar. The light itself, the 10,000-year promise Rava made to a dying man in the wilds. She would be the last thin thread of it, hunted on both sides, alone on a wooden leg, choosing to carry a flame that everyone around her is trying to put out. I do not know if the show goes there. I have been honest all night about the line between what we know and what we are imagining, and this is firmly on the imagining side of that line. But it is the direction the pieces point, and it is the reason a show that has not aired a single episode has been living rent-free in my head since the teaser dropped. Because underneath the mystery box marketing and the careful rollout, there is the possibility of a story about whether hope itself can survive being hated. And that is a story worth losing a little sleep over, even as it helps you find it. Let me set Pavi's moment inside the whole sweep of time now, gently, because I think it helps to feel how small and how enormous her place in the story is at once. 10,000 years before her, a thief named Juan wandered into the wilds, bonded with a spirit of light, and became the first of a line that would never fully break until perhaps her. For most of those 10,000 years, the mortal and spirit worlds stayed apart, walled off, and the Avatar was reborn nation to nation, a fixed and turning wheel, carrying balance forward one life at a time through countless names, most of which the shows never even told us. Then, closer to our own window, came the Avatars we watched, a firebender who befriended the wrong man and could not stop a war, an airbending boy frozen in ice who woke a century too late and ended that war anyway, a waterbender from the south who dragged the world into a new age, threw open the doors between the worlds, and severed her own line to everyone who came before. And then, an unspecified stretch of years later, in a world broken past recognition, an earthbending girl in a city called Elora, who does not yet know what any of that history has cost her. What strikes me, laying it out end to end, is how Pavi stands at the far end of an almost unimaginable length of time, and how little of it she can reach. Every avatar before Korra had that whole 10,000 years available to them as a living resource, thousands of former selves to counsel them, the accumulated wisdom of 100 centuries. Pavi has a decade or two, if that, the single life of Korra, on the other end of her spiritual reach, and beyond it, silence. She is the inheritor of the longest story in her world, and she has been locked out of nearly all of it. Standing at the end of 10,000 years with access to almost none of them is its own kind of tragedy, a library that stretches back to the dawn of the world with all but the last page torn out. And she has to write the next page anyway, blind to nearly everything that came before, in a world that has forgotten or twisted most of that history into a story about how the Avatar is to blame. There is also a strange comfort hidden in that vastness, though, and it is the note I want to rest on. 10,000 years is a long time, and the world in that time has broken before. It broke when Vaatu escaped into it at the very beginning. It broke under a 100-year war. It broke in smaller ways again and again across all those unrecorded lives, and every time the cycle carried something forward, a spark handed from one life to the next, and the world, battered and imperfect, kept going. If Seven Havens is a story about a world that has broken more completely than ever before, it is also, by the simple fact of the Avatar's existence in it, a story that says the spark got handed forward one more time. Pavi is proof that the chain reached the far side of the apocalypse. Whatever the cataclysm was, it did not end the Avatar. The wheel turned from water to earth, right on schedule, in the middle of the ruins. Somewhere in a shattered world, a new light was lit. That is not nothing. In a story this dark, it might be the one hopeful fact at the center of everything. And it is a confirmed one, sitting right there at the center of everything we know. So that is the ground, all of it, the confirmed and the interpreted and the openly imagined, laid out as honestly as I can manage. A third series from the original creators in a broken world, with a hated earthbending avatar named Pavi, her lost twin Nisha, her airbending mentor Jay, hunted by both worlds, cut off from all her past lives but one, carrying the whole 10,000-year promise of the Avatar on a carved prosthetic through the wreckage of everything. Premiering on the 9th of October, 2 books, and only 2, to tell its whole story from that dark beginning through to whatever ending has already been planned for it. And beyond those handful of facts, a great warm darkness of things we do not yet know, waiting to be filled by the show itself, rather than by any of us guessing in the dark. That, in the end, is everything we know about Avatar 7 Havens, which is both a great deal and almost nothing. And that gap is exactly where the wonder lives. I have been thinking, these last few days since the teaser, about what it is we are actually doing when we sit with a show that does not exist yet. When we pore over a 2-minute trailer and a paragraph of logline and a cast list as though they were sacred texts. It is a slightly strange behavior when you look at it plainly. We are, in a sense, in love with something that has not happened. And I've come to think that the waiting is its own quiet pleasure, separate from the show itself, and worth savoring rather than rushing through. Right now, before a single episode airs, Seven Havens is perfect, because it is still entirely possibility. It has not made a single misstep, written a single flat line, fumbled a single arc, because it has not written anything we can see yet. It exists as pure potential, the best version of itself living in all our heads at once. And there is something precious about that stage. The stage before the thing becomes real, and therefore becomes flawed the way all real things are. That is part of why I tried so hard tonight not to fill the emptiness with invented certainty, because the emptiness is doing something valuable. It is holding the space open for the series to surprise us. Every question I refuse to answer, every theory I set gently on the bottom shelf, is a door I am leaving closed so that the show gets to open it. And I think that is the kindest way to love something that is coming, to protect its ability to surprise you, to not spoil it for yourself with confident guesses, to arrive at the first episode actually not knowing, the way we all arrived at that first episode of the original series 2 decades ago, with no idea that a children's cartoon about a boy and an iceberg was about to become one of the great stories of a generation. None of us knew then what we were about to be given. There is a gift in getting to not know again. I have found myself turning the title itself over too in these quiet days of waiting, because the names of these shows have always told you something about their souls before you watched a frame. Consider the first one, The Last Airbender. That title is about loss, about loneliness, about being the final survivor of a vanished people, and the whole show lives inside that ache, a boy carrying the weight of being the last of his kind. Then the second, The Legend of Korra. That title does something different. It mythologizes a single person, turns a name into a legend, and the show is fittingly about one woman becoming herself, about the making and breaking and remaking of a single soul under enormous pressure. The titles were never arbitrary. They were the first note of the melody. And so when I look at this new one, Seven Havens, I cannot help reading it the same way, listening for what the name is faintly telling us. And what strikes me is that this title, for the first time, is not about a person at all. It is about places, and it is about plurality, and it is about scarcity. Seven Havens. Not the last anything, not the legend of anyone, but a number and a set of refuges. The very grammar of it tells you the story has shifted from a single hero to a fractured world, from one soul at the center to 7 fragile points of shelter scattered across a ruin. Where the first title mourned a lost people and the second elevated a single life, this one counts what is left. There is something almost administrative about it, 7, as though someone has taken stock of a broken world and found that this, exactly this many, is all that remains. And a haven is a specific kind of place. It is not a home, not a kingdom, not a nation. A haven is somewhere you flee to. The word itself carries the assumption of danger outside its walls, of people who have run to safety rather than people who simply live somewhere. To build a title out of that word and to put a number in front of it is to tell you, before the story starts, that this is a world defined by what it is hiding from. I think that is why the title unsettles me a little, in a way the earlier ones did not, and I mean unsettles in the good sense. The sense that makes you lean in. The first 2 titles put a person at the center and promised you a journey with them. This one puts a broken map at the center and promises you a world holding its breath. It is the difference between a story that says, "Come meet this remarkable soul," and a story that says, "Come see what is left." That is a bleaker, braver framing, and it is entirely of a piece with everything else about this show: the shattered world, the hunted avatar, the 7 marks of light in a great darkness. Even the name is built for loneliness and scale. And yet, I keep noticing the avatar is still in there. Still the first word, avatar, 7 havens. The soul is still at the front of the title, even in a world that hates her. She has not been erased from the name of her own franchise, however much the world inside it might wish she were. There is a small, stubborn defiance in that, the avatar's name still leading, still there, in front of the count of everything that broke. I doubt the creators labor over these things the way I am laboring over them at this hour. But titles carry weight, and this one carries exactly the weight of the story underneath it. And there is something fitting, too, about spending these slow pre-dawn hours with a story about a broken world and a hunted girl and the stubborn survival of hope. Because that is, in a small way, what these long, quiet nights are for. Not to solve anything, not to reach a verdict, just to sit in a vast and gentle uncertainty, to let the mind wander through a world it loves, to feel the size of 10,000 years and the smallness of a single new life carrying a light through the dark, and to let all of it soften into the shapelessness that comes right before sleep. The show, when it comes, will be what it will be. Tonight it is only a possibility, glowing without fuss at the edge of October, and possibility is a very peaceful thing to fall asleep beside. It is worth remembering as we drift toward the end of this, how unlikely it is that we are even here. A cartoon that finished 18 years ago was supposed to be a fond memory by now, a thing you watched as a kid, filed away, mentioned once in a while. Instead, it grew into something people build parts of their lives around, quote to each other, return to when the world is heavy, hand to their own children the way a favorite book gets handed down. Very few stories manage that. Most of what we love as children stays in childhood, and we visit it later with a kind of gentle embarrassment. Avatar did the rarer thing. It followed its audience upward, kept revealing new depths as they aged, and earned the right to come back not as nostalgia, but as something still living, still capable of saying something true. That a new chapter is arriving at all, made by the same hands that started it, aimed at the same hearts that never let it go, is a small piece of evidence that some stories really do endure, that care put into a thing echoes forward for decades, that the good version of this can happen. Whether Seven Havens turns out to be great or flawed or something in between, it carries that lineage into a new generation, and it does it by taking the bravest possible swing, a hated avatar in a shattered world, choosing to protect people who would rather she had never been born. If the show has half the heart of what came before it, that will be a story worth staying up for and worth falling asleep to in the long, slow weeks of waiting. And if it stumbles, well, the world it belongs to has survived worse. 10,000 years of breaking and mending, and the affection people carry for it will survive one imperfect series too. Either way, we get to go back. Either way, on the 9th of October, the wheel turns again, and we get to see what an earth-bending girl named Pavi does with the light she has been handed. And whatever she does with it, we will be there to watch, the way we were there for a boy in an iceberg and a woman from the south, adding one more life to the long chain of stories we have carried with us. One more turn of a wheel that has been turning in one form or another for longer than any of us have been alive. So settle in the rest of the way now. Let your shoulders drop, let the details blur, all the names and dates and careful maybes loosening their grip as you sink toward sleep. There is nothing left to figure out tonight. The show will keep, the mystery will keep, the Seven Havens will still be standing in the morning, and so, almost silently, will the strange and stubborn hope that lives at the center of this whole story, waiting patiently for October in no hurry at all. Rest easy. Thank you genuinely for spending this long night here with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.